Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabbi Doolin. Gabbi Doolin was born on December 26, 2007 in the small town of Scottsville, Kentucky, with a population of just over 4,000 people. Scottsville was mostly a farming community where many folks knew each other well, or at least knew someone from each local family. Like in many similar small towns, there weren't a lot of entertainment options in Scottsville. The only major thing for locals was school sports, particularly football. The local school had pretty decent fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they regularly hosted games and competitions. It became a sort of tradition for locals to attend these activities, especially if their children were involved. Gabbi's family was no different. Her parents had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The oldest boy was on the school's football team, while Gabbi herself got into cheerleading in November 2015 when she was 7. Their town was gearing up for the biggest football game of the year, and Gabbi's older brother was on the team. However, Gabbi was more interested in just hanging out and having fun with other kids than in the game itself. Her parents initially planned to leave Gabbi at home with their youngest son under the care of a relative, but Gabbi managed to convince them to take her with them. On the evening of November 14th, they headed to the school field. Besides the local crowd, there were also many folks from the other county who came to watch the game and support their team. As soon as their family arrived at the stadium, Gabbi spotted her friends and asked her mom if she could go play with them. Her mom agreed, but warned her to stay within the school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers and Gabbi ran off to her friends. From then on, Gabbi dashed back and forth to her mom a few times before going off to play again. At some point, she also came to her dad, who was in an announcement room, and Gabbi asked him for some money to buy some snacks at the concession stand before darting away. Sometime later, Gabbi's friends ran up to her mom in the bleachers. She glanced at the group and immediately noticed her daughter wasn't among them. The girls asked if she had seen Gabbi, and they seemed visibly worried. The woman replied that she hadn't seen her for quite a while. She then asked what was going on, and the girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek. Gabbi was supposed to find them, and they hid in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabbi never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot and went to look for her, but Gabbi was nowhere to be found. They called her name, checked all the places they had been playing before, but their friend seemed to have vanished into thin air. That's when they thought Gabbi might have gone to the bleachers to her mom and ran there. Her mother immediately started to panic and went to her husband, but Gabbi wasn't there either. She told him that Gabbi was missing, and he rushed to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother went to the concession stand where her daughter had wanted to buy some snacks and began searching for her there. On the way, the parents met their friends and informed them about their daughter's disappearance. Hearing that, they joined the worried parents, helping with the search. After scouring the entire area around the stadium and finding no sign of Gabbi, the parents went back and made an announcement over the loudspeakers, hoping Gabbi would hear it, but that yielded no results either. By that time, there was a break in the game and people were returning to the bleachers. The parents continued asking everyone if they had seen Gabbi, and some of them joined in the search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. The adults walked through it, but still couldn't find her. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since her disappearance, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers immediately arrived at the school, listened to the parents' and Gabbi's friends' accounts, and began searching. The local police department had little experience with such serious cases, as child disappearances rarely occurred in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario that someone had abducted or attacked her. In that case, they faced one problem. The likely perpetrator was probably at the stadium watching the game, which was about to end any minute. So the officers realized they had very little time, and soon people would start going home, including the alleged perpetrator. Eventually, they decided to halt the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside the building. Officers watched every exit to prevent anyone from slipping away. The police didn't inform people about what was happening to avoid disrupting the search efforts. If everyone knew that the police were considering the possibility that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl was in the same vicinity as them, the situation could quickly escalate. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the area. They reached the baseball field and headed into the woods. After some distance into the trees, they stumbled upon a small creek and saw her body in it. They identified her as Gabbi and called for an ambulance to take the body to the medical examiner. However, even a visual inspection was enough to suggest that the cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were distinct marks on her neck. Part of her clothing was also missing, leading the police to suspect that the victim had been sexually assaulted. Gabbi's mother saw the ambulance near the woods and thought the police had found her daughter who needed medical attention. She rushed there, but the police stopped her as they didn't want the woman to see this horrifying scene. Now that the police were dealing with a murder, they decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. Investigators believed that the killer was likely among them, so they needed to quickly figure out how to identify them. They spoke to Gabbi's parents and told them about what likely happened to their daughter. Investigators also asked if they had any suspicions about who could have committed such a heinous act. Perhaps they had noticed someone suspicious, or someone had threatened their family. But Gabbi's parents insisted they had no idea who could have done this. Detectives then talked to Gabbi's friends and asked if they had seen anything strange that evening. Maybe someone had been watching or following them. But the girls said they couldn't recall anything like that. The police also brought them to the gym and asked them to look carefully at the people present, hoping they might remember something, but it didn't lead to anything. The lead detective continued to believe that the victim's friends might have seen the kidnapper, but either they were afraid to point him out or simply didn't understand the significance of their observations due to their age. He kept asking them to remember every moment of that evening, and finally, one of them mentioned that when they hid from Gabbi in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. She remembered almost no details about his appearance except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the cashier who sold tickets to the game, and he also recalled the man with the denim jacket hanging on his arm. He added that this person seemed strange and intoxicated to him. However, they still couldn't identify this man. At that moment, the police gradually interviewed the attendees of the game, and pretty soon, everyone learned why they were being held there. Realizing that they might be in the same room with the killer, people were frightened, especially for their kids, but still cooperated with the police and answered their questions. Investigators cross-referenced the list of names of all the men in the gym with a sex offenders registry, but there were no matches. The police also sent officers to the homes of several such offenders living within close proximity, but they all had solid alibis, and none of them were near the school. Meanwhile, officers continued to interview people at the school, and they soon came across some interesting leads. Several individuals told them that during the game they saw a man named Timothy Madden near the women's restroom behaving strangely. He was a local resident, so many people knew him, but according to witnesses, that evening he was acting suspiciously. They also mentioned that he was wearing a denim jacket, the same description provided by one of Gabbi's friends who had also seen a man near the restroom. Another witness was a distant relative of Timothy. He mentioned that during the game, Timothy seemed kind of off, and his younger son was playing on the field. But according to the witness, Timothy, who usually was very involved in his son's sports achievements, wasn't even paying attention to the field and seemed lost. Several more witnesses told the police that Timothy's behavior seemed strange to them, prompting investigators to talk to him. It was already nighttime, and they had to release almost everyone from the school. They decided to visit him, but first asked the local sheriff what he thought about Timothy. The sheriff said that he had known him practically all his life and highly doubted that he was capable of such a crime. Timothy had almost no criminal record except for some traffic fines, and he had never been involved in any suspicious situations before. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children, and the police decided to go talk to him immediately. When they knocked on his door, Timothy opened it, and the officers asked if he knew why they were there. He replied that he had heard about her murder, but had nothing to do with it. Detectives then decided to try one trick and asked him a loaded question. They asked whether he had any explanation for several videos provided by eyewitnesses, showing him talking to Gabbi shortly before her murder. There were no videos or witnesses, and the question was designed to prompt the man to reveal some new information if he indeed had something to do with the crime. At first, Timothy said he didn't know, but then he quickly corrected himself. He admitted that he did talk to Gabbi that evening near the stadium. According to him, he stepped out to smoke, and at that moment, several girls ran past him. Shortly after, Gabbi passed by and asked if he had seen her friends because they were playing hide and seek, and she needed to find them. Timothy pointed her in the right direction, and she ran off. The detectives found it suspicious how quickly Timothy changed his story. Moreover, his account indicated that he spoke to the victim just minutes before her disappearance, and at that time, there were no witnesses outside the stadium, so it gave him the opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives also asked if he would have any explanation if they found his DNA on the victim's body, and Timothy calmly replied no. Finally, they asked him to provide them with a DNA sample and the clothing he wore at the stadium. He agreed to both requests, but as soon as Timothy handed over the clothing to the police, they discovered some stains on it. There was something resembling blood stains on the pants, denim jacket, and even underwear. Detectives asked if he could explain it, and Timothy claimed that they were insane and that it wasn't blood, but some dirt. However, the police thought otherwise, although they needed to wait for the DNA analysis results before they could arrest him. Even though this case was a priority for the lab, it still took several days for the experts to examine all the samples and conduct the analysis. The forensic pathologist soon finished examining the body and confirmed that Gabbi's cause of death was manual strangulation. He also confirmed that the victim had been brutally assaulted and extracted a biological sample of the perpetrator, which was sent to the laboratory the day after the murder. Something unexpected happened. The police received an anonymous letter from someone who reported a suspicious individual present at the game. The author wrote down the model of his car and even the license plate, which allowed the investigators to quickly identify the owner of the vehicle. It turned out to be a student living half an hour's drive from Scottsville. The police went there and began questioning him, but the guy claimed he hadn't been to any game and hadn't even heard of the murder. He added that he was at work that evening, and the police found undoubtful confirmation of his alibi. He was crossed off the list of suspects, but the author of the letter was never found. Perhaps someone decided to frame him or play a cruel prank, but the guy was truly innocent. The police soon received another lead. Several people reported strange behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He told different people that he had been at the game, but then claimed he hadn't attended it. The young man also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. Detectives found out that this boy was Timothy Madden's son, but that wasn't the most surprising revelation. They learned that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had become angry with his father and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Knowing this information, the police headed to speak with him. But there was a problem. They needed the presence of the minor's parents, and his mother refused to provide a DNA sample, leaving the police empty-handed. In Scottsville, a small town where everyone knew each other, rumors spread like wildfire. People heard that the police were looking into the Madden family regarding Gabbi's murder, sparking various theories. Some thought one of Madden's troubled older sons could be responsible, while others suspected Madden himself or thought he might be covering for his sons. Gabbi's parents also became aware of these rumors, which came as a big shock to them. Gabbi's father had known Timothy since 3rd grade and also knew his whole family. Their sons played on the same football team, and their daughters were cheerleading together. Both families were close, even sitting near each other at the game. With all this in mind, Gabbi's parents found it hard to believe that anyone from their circle could have been involved in the murder. After the rumors spread around town, something else happened. The eldest son of the Madden family, who was 20 years old, began contacting local officers on social media. He used foul language and threatened them, demanding they leave his family alone. He was immediately arrested for the threats, and the police quickly discovered that there was an active warrant for his arrest in another town. It turned out he was suspected of assaulting a minor girl. They brought him in for questioning, and the young man claimed he was simply frustrated by the accusations against his family. He also said he had nothing to do with the murder and that he was at his cousin's house in the neighboring town that evening. He agreed to provide his DNA sample, which was also sent to the laboratory on November 20th. 6 days after the murder, Gabbi's funeral took place. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye, not only from Scottsville, but also from other towns. People donated a significant amount of money to Gabbi's parents to help cover the funeral and farewell ceremony expenses. Meanwhile, the lab completed the DNA analysis and compared the blood and semen samples with Timothy and his son's DNA. The results showed a complete match. The semen found on the victim's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on his clothes belonged to Gabbi. Upon receiving this news, detectives went to the funeral when Gabbi's parents were alone and informed them of the discovery of the killer. At the same time, the police officers went to Timothy's house and he was arrested. As he was being transported from the police station, he shouted to the gathered reporters that he was innocent. Later, he claimed that the blood on his clothes was his own, as he had scratched himself passing by a fence, even though initially he had told the police that it wasn't blood at all but mud. With the DNA match in hand, the investigators took the case to court and the prosecution stated they would seek the death penalty. During the trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer insisted his client was innocent and that the origin of the evidence raised serious questions. He argued that during the supposed murder, Timothy was at the stadium filming the game, even though Timothy himself had told the police he saw Gabbi around the same time. The lawyer also tried to point out the fact that Gabbi's body was found in a creek, but his client's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium. Timothy's mother, who lived with him, stated that Timothy returned home in clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution pointed out that all these arguments crumbled in the face of the fact that the suspect's semen was found on the victim's body. There could be no other explanation for this, and therefore, there was no doubt about Timothy's involvement. According to the police, his account of that evening contains some portion of the truth. He could have indeed stepped out of the stadium during the game and encountered Gabbi, who was looking for her friends. She knew Timothy well because he was the father of one of her friends. She might have approached him and asked where the other girls had gone, and that's when he devised a plan. He could have said they ran into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to escort Gabbi there. Once they were a few hundred yards away from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then returned to the game. The wait for the trial dragged on for years, much to Gabbi's family's dismay. They wanted the murderer to be punished, but due to bureaucracy, the case progressed slowly. In 2019, 4 years after the murder, the parties began discussing a possible plea deal. The prosecution offered to drop the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence, with Timothy having to admit his guilt. Gabbi's parents agreed to this option because the endless wait for the trial was a heavy burden for them. Moreover, if the trial finally began, they would have to attend hearings for months, essentially reliving their daughter's death all over again. Timothy, who kept insisting on his innocence, eventually agreed and confessed. However, the terms of the deal didn't require him to reveal the details of what he did. He just had to admit his guilt. These terms didn't satisfy Gabbi's family because they wanted the perpetrator to fully confess to what he had done to their daughter. During the court hearing, Gabbi's father started yelling at Timothy, while the defendant's relatives began shouting at Gabbi's family. Eventually, the judge had to take a break and separate them. In the end, Timothy received a life sentence and went to serve it in a maximum security prison. But that's not all. In 2016, a year after Gabbi's murder, something else happened involving Timothy Madden. A boy from a neighboring state saw a news report about the crime and recognized Timothy. Several years ago, he and his friend were walking near a mall parking lot when an adult man approached them. He tried to convince the boys to get into his car for a ride, but they found the offer extremely strange and ran away from him. The friend's relative contacted the police, and according to the boy who saw the news report, he was no other than Timothy Madden. However, there was no substantial evidence for this case, so it didn't progress any further. Nevertheless, if Timothy had indeed attempted to abduct two boys in another state, it could tell us about his true nature more clearly. Perhaps before Gabbi's murder, he had been trying to find other victims but had no success. And on that evening when she approached him near the stadium, he decided to seize the opportunity to satisfy his horrific fantasies. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In a heart-wrenching tale of tragedy, we meet Eva Blanco Puig, a young soul taken too soon at just 16 years old. For 18 agonizing years, her story remained shrouded in darkness until the truth, once elusive, finally surfaced through DNA samples, unmasking the face of the perpetrator. For 18 long years, the questions haunted those who loved her. Who could do such a thing? Why was justice so elusive? But the memory of Eva's radiant spirit never faded, as it was for Eva etched in the hearts of those she left behind. And thus, the relentless pursuit of justice for their loved one never ceased. Eva Blanco Puig was born on February 17, 1981, in Spain to Manuel Blanco and Olga Puig. By 1997, the couple was living a quiet and peaceful life, having already settled in Aldehuela, a small municipality of Madrid that was well away from all the bustle of the capital, together with their three daughters, Eva, Rebecca, and Maria. Eva, among her closest companions and beloved kin, was often portrayed as a rather quiet girl yet exuded an enchanting air of mirth and dependability, and was an absolute delight to be around. She also thrived in the realm of athletic pursuits, with her passion for sports illuminating her days with unbridled joy. At school, she found herself embraced by a multitude of admirers for her magnetic charisma and warm-hearted nature that knew no bounds. Eva always set a good example for her younger sisters, and being a responsible girl, she did not give her parents great displeasure as she complied with all the rules that they dictated, with one of them being the curfew that they had always set for her. However, on this fateful day, things did not go as planned. On the afternoon of April 19th, Eva and her friends were playing tennis, enjoying the carefree moments that only youth could offer. But little did they know that this seemingly ordinary afternoon would take a dark and harrowing turn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, being a Saturday, they decided to go to a local disco to cherish their unbreakable bonds of friendship and spend more time with each other, extending it into the late night. Eva had already asked her mother for permission to extend her curfew slightly, and Olga, seeing that her daughter had always been responsible, rewarded her as they agreed that by midnight she should already be back home. The clock struck 11:30 p.m., and little by little, the group bid their farewells, heading home. Among them was Blanco, whose journey home would unfortunately lead her into the shadows of mystery. Accompanied by her friend, Eva ventured towards a vacant lot that served as a shortcut to her home. It was a path she had walked countless times before, but destiny had something else in store for her. At around 11:45 p.m., They parted ways as Blanco took her familiar path through the dark, vacant lot, with no inkling that it would be their last goodbye. As midnight approached, Eva's mother grew restless, her heart burdening with worry as her daughter failed to arrive home. She reached out to Eva's friends, hoping for any clue to her whereabouts, only to be told that everyone had already parted ways, and Eva should have already arrived at home by then. This rang her alarm bells as she alerted her husband, who was a tow truck driver. He then began searching for Eva in the town, together with his nephew, a local police officer, and also with the help of the father of one of Eva's friends. When the clock struck 1 a.m., Blanco's parents reported her disappearance at the local civil guard station. But to their dismay, the officers showed little concern for filing a disappearance report for someone missing just a little over an hour. The guard at the door callously dismissed the seriousness of the situation, claiming that children of her age were all on drugs, and she was probably lying in a doorway or on some sidewalk, clearly implying she was not worth that much attention to them. In the darkness of the night, Blanco's father made a harrowing journey to the local civil guard station up to 15 times. With frustration in his heart, he criticized the institution for their lack of urgency in searching rural roads or utilizing vehicles before sunrise. He accused them of neglect, citing a shortage of gas as their excuse. But the civil guards refuted his claims, defending their customary practice of waiting for a few hours to pass before initiating a search after a missing person report. A father's plea for his daughter's safe return hung in the balance as the truth behind the delay remained shrouded in doubt and despair. As the night deepened, the frantic search for Blanco commenced at 2:30 a.m. Her family, friends, and authorities scoured the streets of the town and the surrounding area, but the civil guard had not yet filed an official missing person report. A missing report was filed at 8 a.m., and the decision to publicize the case was made at noon. Blanco's family reached out to the regional TV station Telemadrid, imploring them for help. At 9 a.m., Eva's lifeless body had been discovered by two elderly residents, 6 kilometers away from Algueta, near a road construction site between Cobeña and Belvis de Jarama. The area was known to be frequented by young couples seeking privacy inside their cars. Initially, a dreadful accident was suspected, with the possibility that she might have been run over by a car. However, when the civil guard arrived, the horrifying truth emerged. Blanco, lying face down on the ground, had been mercilessly stabbed multiple times while desperately trying to escape her assailant. The clothes she wore on the day of her disappearance, a pair of jeans, a dark sweater, and mountain boots, clung to her lifeless form, with only one sleeve of her jacket missing, hinting at a sinister struggle. The investigators believed that both Blanco and her killer had arrived at the scene in a vehicle, but heavy rain during the night had erased any tire tracks or crucial forensic evidence. Despite the challenging circumstances, the investigators discovered faint footprints from Blanco and a foreboding clue of footprints of a man wearing size 42 moccasins, providing a faint glimmer of hope in their pursuit of justice for the innocent soul lost. The civil guard notified Blanco's family of the discovery at 3:30 p.m. The news caused commotion in the town of just 12,300 people at the time, with no recent instances of violent crime. At around 7 p.m., 200 people gathered silently before Blanco's home to condemn her murder. Her funeral was held on the 23rd of April and was attended by 2,000 people. In a devastating revelation from the autopsy report, Eva endured a horrifying fate, suffering 19 stab wounds to her back, leading to her tragic demise due to blood loss around 4 a.m. The murder weapon, a Navaja-style knife between 8 and 10 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide, became a terrifying instrument of her torment. The first stab occurred while she was still in a vehicle, while the subsequent ones followed as she desperately tried to run up a slope beside the road. Many of the wounds, particularly those on her ear and the back of her head, were distressingly deemed passionate in nature, adding to the brutality of the crime. Among the horrifying details, The first injury stood out, deep and potentially fatal, even without the additional wounds inflicted later. The tragedy did not end there, as the evidence revealed the heartbreaking violation of Blanco's innocence. The presence of the same man's bodily fluid was discovered in her mouth, genitals, and underwear, testimony to a heinous act that defies comprehension. The discovery of a red fiber in her mouth, identified as common car upholstery by the Catalonia Textile Museum and Documentation Center, confirmed that Blanco had been in a vehicle after her abduction. These shocking details painted a heart-rending picture of the unspeakable pain and suffering endured by this innocent soul in her final moments. Due to the body being found dressed and showing no apparent signs of violence, both the coroner and officers initially speculated that the sexual encounter may have been consensual, leading to a fatal altercation afterward. In stark contrast, Eva's grieving parents firmly believed that their daughter had been abducted, sexually assaulted at knife point, and then murdered to prevent her from seeking justice for the heinous act. The civil guard anticipated that the case would be closed after a short investigation, with their prevailing theory pointing towards a single individual known to Blanco. Allegedly, this person approached her in a car, offering a ride that she accepted, leading them to the secluded construction site, a well-known lover's lane, where the tragic events unfolded. Blanco's ex-boyfriend, residing in Fuente El Saz, who had recently separated from her, became an initial suspect, but he was cleared following police questioning. Subsequently, the focus of the investigation shifted towards adult men known to Blanco's family, individuals that she might have trusted to board their vehicle. As the investigation progressed, the case proved to be more intricate than initially thought, and the likelihood of a stranger's involvement could not be ruled out. Blanco's close acquaintances vehemently maintained that she would never willingly enter a vehicle with someone she did not know, leading them to believe that she had been coerced into the car under duress. Further complicating matters, several residents connected the incident to a suspicious blue vehicle observed in the area at around 12 a.m. One of the car's occupants was described as a fair-haired male, estimated to be roughly 20 years of age. Unfortunately, nobody thought to write down the car's license plate number, which could have been an essential piece of evidence in the investigation. The discovery of an unidentified male bodily fluid on the young woman's body and clothes during the investigation was concealed from Blanco's family and the public, as the officers secretly collected DNA samples from her male relatives and acquaintances to compare with the fluid's DNA. Eva's father's sample was obtained from a discarded cigarette he smoked while drinking coffee and discussing the case with the civil guard officers, while others were surreptitiously taken during unrelated blood alcohol content tests or from the cups and glasses they used in bars. Despite not finding any matches, the civil guard remained steadfast in their belief that the perpetrator was an adult male residing in Al Hit or a nearby town. The pursuit of justice continued in the shadows while the heartbroken family yearned for answers that instead created more questions. 8 months after the tragic incident, Blanco's mother found in her daughter's room 2 hidden notebooks that were labeled 95 to 96 and 96 to 97. Within these pages, Blanco had meticulously chronicled her daily experiences until the day of her murder. The entries predominantly featured the names Eva and Miguel, referring to her ex-boyfriend, written repeatedly in various pen colors. However, just 2 pages before the final one, the names Eva and Miguel were replaced with Eva and 34310. Despite numerous efforts to decipher the significance of the number, all attempts proved futile. Speculations surrounding the number range from it being related to the phone code of Spain, which is 34, and the postal code of the town, which is 110, to yet again being associated with a pager number from a Coca-Cola promotion. At that time, the mystery of the number remained unsolved, leaving Blanco's loved ones and investigators haunted by the enigmatic clue. Upon learning that his DNA had been compared to the fluids found in his daughter's body, and that he had been excluded as a suspect, Blanco's father initiated a campaign to rally other residents of Al-Hiti for voluntary DNA samples to aid in apprehending his daughter's killer. With the support of Mayor Jesus Herrera Fernandez, an official announcement was made in November 1999, urging all male residents over 16 years old, estimated to be 5,000 individuals, to voluntarily provide their hair or saliva samples. However, Spanish judicial organizations unanimously rejected the proposition, deeming it simple-minded, disproportionate, useless, and potentially stigmatizing for those who chose not to provide their DNA without a court order, which was their legal right to do so. They also believed that the culprit would obviously not volunteer to provide their sample. Nevertheless, Blanco's father managed to collect 2,013 samples from the residents of Al-Het and nearby towns, depositing them at the local courthouse until further decisions were made. The examining magistrate of the case sought a report from Madrid's chief prosecutor to assess the legal feasibility of such tests. The response that was issued on March 30th, 2000, emphasized that testing should be limited to individuals who could be considered suspicious based on the investigation rather than merely volunteers. Consequently, only samples from 45 people were tested, including 12 relatives from Eva's father's and mother's sides, her acquaintances, and individuals with a prior criminal record, with a particular focus on cases involving sexual misconduct and knife violence. The search for justice persisted amidst the legal complexities and the never-ending determination of those who sought the truth behind Eva's tragic fate. Despite the case hitting a standstill, the homicide group of the Civil Guard remained resolute, never allowing it to fade into oblivion. Over the years, each new member and commander took it upon themselves to revisit the case file, hoping to bring a fresh perspective. The investigation expanded beyond borders, with information sought from various law enforcement agencies, including the Ertzaintza and the FBI. A DNA specialist from the University of Santiago de Compostela re-examined the evidence, revealing that the DNA belonged to a man of non-European descent. Over the years, the number of individuals investigated soared to 1,503, including 208 men from Alget and neighboring towns who voluntarily underwent DNA testing, even encompassing criminals on leave during the time of the murder. A new examining magistrate allowed the opening and checking of the 2013 envelopes containing the names of the volunteers from 1999, but not the testing of all DNA samples. La Sexta's investigative show, La Sexta Columna, aired an episode about the case titled Eva, a Cold Case, on April 26, 2013, that featured interviews with Blanco's loved ones and experts. Psychologist and criminologist Vicente Garrido proposed the theory of a stalker as the likely perpetrator, challenging the Civil Guard's secret boyfriend hypothesis. The lack of defensive wounds suggested threats, and the criminal could be of low intelligence, uneducated, and emotionally immature, given that he was seeking intimacy with a teenager instead of a woman his age. He might have had no family, as they would have noticed his late-night activities, and the possibility of him continuing his crimes elsewhere or being in prison for other attacks was considered. Following the program's broadcast, a woman came forward to authorities reporting that she had seen a suspicious man at the road construction site around 8 a.m. before Eva's body had been found. The man appeared disheveled, walking in the rain without an umbrella, looking like he hadn't slept through the night, and was searching for something before getting into a white Renault 18. The Civil Guard considered her testimony reliable, as other witnesses had also reported a Renault 18 over the years, which matched the fiber found on Blanco's body. On October 28, 2013, a facial composite of the suspect, made in collaboration with the new witness, was released. The man was described to be between 35 and 40 years old in 1997, around 1.7 to 1.8 meters tall, corpulent with his weight between 75 to 80 kilograms, with short spiky brown hair, a square and hardened face, and dark sunken eyes. He was said to be dressed in a white shirt and a V-neck sweater, and he drove a white Renault 18 with red upholstery. To gather clues, a confidential phone number and email address were set up, resulting in 100 emails received by January 1, 2014. By the end of 2013, a breakthrough in the investigation revealed that the DNA from the fluids pointed to a man of North African descent. The civil guard petitioned the 300 North African men who lived in Algete in 1997 for voluntary samples. A former neighbor of Blanco's, now residing in southern France, shared a remarkable genetic match with the killer, indicating a possible sibling relationship. Further analysis of a brother living in Murcia, who had never lived in Algete, yielded an identical match, leading to a European arrest warrant for the third brother, Ahmed Chel Gersh. On October 1, 2015, Ahmed was apprehended outside his workplace in Villeurbanne, France, in a joint operation involving the Civil Guard and the French Gendarmerie. Ahmed Chel Gersh, born on March 1, 1963, in Taza, Morocco, was 34 years old at the time of the murder. He married a 20-year-old Spanish woman in Madrid in 1989 and obtained Spanish citizenship in the 1990s. They went on to have children, and at the time of Blanco's murder, Chel's wife was 5 months pregnant. They never appeared as residents of Algete since they lived in a caravan provided by Chel's employer at a plant nursery where he worked as a delivery man. Their residence, located next to the Puente del Retamar Road, was approximately 4 kilometers away from the crime scene. In 1999, the Chel family moved to France, where, although they continued to be listed as married in Spain, they had separated amicably. Chel remarried to a 24-year-old Moroccan student in Villeurbanne in 2003, settling in a village approximately 20 kilometers from the Swiss border, and went on to have children as well. In France, he worked as a welder for a farm machinery company, but his relationship with co-workers was reportedly troubled. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Chel claimed that 2 unidentified men brought him to Blanco's body and forced him to touch himself over her body. However, his ex-wife contradicted this account by informing journalists that Ahmed had actually gone out with his brothers, as they often did during the weekends. She revealed that one of the brothers had disclosed that they were at the same disco as Blanco and had spoken to her after she argued with her ex-boyfriend. While Blanco initially left the disco with the brothers, she returned inside with her friends around 11 p.m. Surprisingly, Chel's ex-wife stated that neither she nor the brothers had ever been interrogated by the police or the civil guard during the investigation. While she denied any mistreatment by Chel, she later admitted to his aggressive behavior when under the influence of alcohol. Descriptions from former co-workers and female customers portrayed him as unsociable, aggressive when drunk, and inappropriate towards women. Blanco's family had minimal interaction with Chel's brothers at most and had never even met Chel himself. On October 5, 2015, Chel attempted to harm himself in his cell, but agreed to be deported to Spain for trial 2 days later. At the preliminary hearing on October 13, he declined to make a statement but provided a DNA sample. Charged with murder, sexual assault, and illegal detention, he was held in Soto del Rio prison pending trial as the DNA testing confirmed his involvement. On October 19th, Chel's defense unsuccessfully requested his release pending trial, arguing a lack of evidence besides DNA and that the civil guard's hypothesis over the past 18 years suggests that Eva willingly got into a car with someone she knew, engaging in consensual intercourse before her tragic death. Therefore, they believed that there was no sense in charging Chel with sexual assault. Due to the idea of Blanco willingly accepting a ride from the Moroccan, given her friend's assurance that she would never get into a car with a stranger, also made them believe he had no involvement. Chel's lawyer argued that Blanco would never willingly associate with the Moroccan due to alleged neo-Nazi sympathies evidenced in her diaries, linking her to the investigation's early focus on the neo-Nazi group, Bases Autonomous. Chel's first wife sparked another conspiracy theory during an interview with TVE's La Mañana, suggesting the involvement of several people known to the Chell family and hinting at those responsible for the murder. She claimed that Chell returned home between 10 o'clock and 11 p.m. that night, citing her pregnancy as the reason he wouldn't stay out late. According to her, he mentioned being mugged by some boys but didn't report it due to fear. In January 2016, prison psychiatric support lifted the anti-suicide measures from Chell, who claimed he was forced to pleasure himself on Blanco, denying any penetration, but was unable to explain how his bodily fluid was found in her genital area. On January 29, 2016, Chell was discovered dead in his cell, having taken his own life by hanging himself with his shoelaces. The prosecution was officially concluded on February 15, 2016. Eva's family, while finding some closure in knowing who had murdered their daughter, felt disappointed that he did not face the consequences for his wicked deeds, but believed that justice would hopefully be served in the afterlife. Eva Blanco Puig had dreams of becoming an architect and had a passion for drawing. She was an ardent fan of Bon Jovi and also African music. Her sensitivity and sincerity created strong bonds with her friends, and her strong laughter became a defining trait of her personality. She was a responsible and caring older sister, always setting a positive example to her younger sisters. The story of Eva Blanco echoes through time, a story of loss, pain, and the relentless pursuit of justice. As we remember her, we also remember the strength of a community united, seeking answers and closure for the young girl whose life was taken too soon. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lisa Valdez. Lisa Valdez was born on September 6, 1961 in San Francisco, California. She had a brother and a loving mother, although their father was not involved in their lives. Despite this, Lisa was exceptionally close to her mother, and they almost never argued. Everyone who knew them was always impressed by how perfect their relationship seemed. In her teenage years, Lisa took up dancing, and it became one of her greatest passions. She also had a keen interest in modern technology, getting into the IT field when it was still in its infancy. For instance, she started using email when most of her friends hadn't even heard of it. This interest in technology shaped her future career. After college, Lisa got a job as a software analyst in San Francisco. Later, her mother used her savings to purchase Lisa an apartment in a prestigious neighborhood. It was a small studio, but the building was situated on a hill, offering a beautiful view of the city. Lisa lived in this apartment alone, advancing in her career and spending as much time as possible with her family. She also continued dancing, attending weekly dance practice sessions with her best friend. On May 16, 1998, when Lisa was 36, she invited her mother and some family friends over for the evening. After the guests left, her mother helped with the dishes and headed home. Before she left, Lisa promised to call her the next day, but she never called. At first, her mom figured she was just busy, as Lisa was supposed to go to dance practice that day, so her mom decided to wait. But the whole day went by without hearing from Lisa. The next day, she tried calling Lisa herself, but there was no answer. The mother kept trying to reach her daughter, but Lisa never picked up. On the fourth day, which was a Monday, Lisa's colleagues contacted her mother and informed her that Lisa had not reported to work and was not answering their phone calls. This was highly unusual, as Lisa was a responsible employee who had never missed work without notice. Concerned, her mother decided to go to Lisa's apartment complex to check on her. However, upon arrival, she noticed police tape surrounding the building and a significant police presence. When she inquired about the situation, the police explained that just a few hours earlier, residents had reported a strange odor coming from one of the apartments. The manager had gone to investigate and found the door unlocked, immediately discovering a body on the floor, prompting the call to the police. The officers quickly identified the deceased as Lisa. She was partially undressed, and her body showed clear signs of trauma, indicating it was a murder. Based on the state of decomposition, they estimated she had been dead for several days. The police also suspected she had been assaulted, as her underwear was found next to the body. The room was covered in blood stains, both on the floor and on the bed. The TV was on, and the air conditioner was set to 78 degrees. The apartment was also in disarray, but detectives later discovered that this was normal for Lisa, who wasn't meticulous about keeping things tidy. There were no signs of a robbery, as all of Lisa's valuables, including her jewelry, were left in plain sight. The only things missing were her keys and a gym bag. Another peculiar detail was that the attacker had cut off some of Lisa's long hair and taken it with them. Combined with the numerous injuries on her body, this suggested the presence of strong personal motives. Detectives speculated that the killer might have known Lisa, and for some reason, harbored hatred towards her, supporting the idea that Lisa was familiar with her attacker. This was further supported by the lack of signs of forced entry, and the fact that Lisa's apartment complex was fenced and required either a key or access granted by a resident. The police started interviewing residents of the complex, hoping someone had seen the attacker, and they quickly found their first lead. One of Lisa's neighbors mentioned that 2 days earlier, after returning from vacation, he noticed part of the metal frame of his front door was bent, and there was a faint blood stain on the door. He reported it to the manager, but they decided not to involve the police, since it was clear no one had broken into his apartment. Detectives were almost certain the same person who killed Lisa was responsible for this incident, but the motives behind the actions were unclear. Perhaps the killer tried to break into the neighbor's apartment and was caught by Lisa, leading to her murder. According to another theory, the attempt to break into the neighbor's apartment might have occurred after Lisa's murder, which seemed odd. Detectives also talked to the housekeeper who cleaned Lisa's apartment every week. 2 days before they found Lisa's body, the housekeeper used her key to enter the complex and tried to open Lisa's door, but it was blocked from the inside. She peeked through the crack and saw a partially undressed woman on the floor and heard a man's voice. Assuming she was interrupting something private, she left right away. The police believed Lisa was already dead by then, and the man's voice belonged to her killer who was still in the apartment. The housekeeper mentioned seeing a black bag with a zipper near the body, but she was unsure as she only glanced at it briefly. Additionally, there was an untouched envelope with cash taped to the inside of Lisa's apartment door. This money was intended for the housekeeper, as Lisa would leave it the day before her scheduled visit since she wouldn't be home. The presence of the untouched envelope suggests that Lisa was likely attacked after her mother's departure, between midnight and early morning, as this was when she would have left the money. This theory was soon confirmed by the neighbors living on the floor below, who reported hearing noises from above that night. They described hearing thumping sounds followed by the sound of someone coming down the stairs, though they did not see who it was. While medical experts examined Lisa's body, detectives continued searching her apartment for clues. They soon noticed something unusual. The toilet seat was up, which was unusual for a woman living alone. Forensic experts examined the toilet seat and found a partial fingerprint that did not belong to Lisa. The police collected fingerprints from all of Lisa's acquaintances and relatives who might have been in her apartment, but none matched this. This led detectives to believe the fingerprint might belong to the killer. The medical experts soon finished their report, giving a new lead. Lisa's body had over 20 stab wounds, but because of the decomposition, they couldn't tell if she had been sexually assaulted. However, they found defensive wounds on her body, indicating that Lisa tried to fight off her attacker. The experts also found skin particles under her nails, likely from the killer, and sent them to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined evidence from the apartment and found a crucial clue. One of the pillowcases had numerous blood stains, but analysis revealed that not all the blood belonged to Lisa. Some stains were different, so the pillowcase was sent to the lab for further examination. Investigators theorized that the killer might have accidentally injured himself while stabbing Lisa, which was common in such cases since a knife can easily slip. This theory was supported by another finding inside the toilet. They discovered 2 bandages from a first aid kit, which the killer might have used to stop his bleeding. He also could have left his fingerprints on the toilet seat while throwing away the bandages. DNA analysis showed that the blood on the pillowcase belonged to an unknown man, not in the FBI database. The skin particles from under Lisa's nails also matched this man, as did the blood stain on her knee. Although there were no matches in the DNA database, detectives now had the killer's DNA profile. They began comparing it with samples from suspects in their system who had committed crimes in Lisa's area, and also started looking closely at her acquaintances. Lisa's mother revealed that Lisa had been dating a man named Albert Kiddo, and they were supposed to go on a date the day after the murder. However, Kiddo had canceled it just a few days prior. Detectives brought Kiddo in for questioning and immediately noticed a large cut on his hand. They suspected that the killer might have injured his hand while stabbing Lisa, and this is common in such attacks. This immediately made Kiddo a suspect, but he denied any involvement in the murder. The detectives took his fingerprints and DNA samples and sent them to the lab for comparison. To their surprise, none of it matched the blood on the pillowcase and the skin particles from under Lisa's nails, clearly belonging to someone else. Investigators continued searching for other possible suspects and decided to listen to the messages on Lisa's answering machine left in the days leading up to the murder. They compiled a list of 40 callers, but one strange message stood out to them. Just a few hours before the murder, while Lisa still had guests at her home, a man called her. But she didn't pick up, so he left a rather unusual message. You know how it goes. Hey Lisa, are you home? The police played this message for Lisa's friend, who immediately recognized the voice as belonging to a colleague of Lisa's named Albert Robinson. He had repeatedly expressed romantic feelings for Lisa, but she wasn't interested in a relationship with him. They continued to interact at work and in the company of mutual acquaintances, and Lisa considered him a friend. Several days after the murder, during the victim's family's memorial service, something else happened. Robinson showed up and gave a speech that puzzled everyone present. He claimed that he and Lisa were deeply in love, planning to get married and start a family. However, Lisa's friends and her mother stated that Robinson's words were completely untrue. Lisa had told them that Robinson had shown interest in her, but she had no romantic feelings for him. Lisa's mother also stressed their close relationship, saying that Lisa wouldn't have hidden such plans from her. Robinson was questioned, where he denied any involvement in the murder. He claimed he loved Lisa and would never harm her. However, he refused to provide his DNA sample and fingerprints to the police. This evidence pointed to Robinson as the main suspect, and detectives continued searching for new leads. If Robinson was obsessed with Lisa and she did not reciprocate his feelings, it could have driven him to commit the crime. The brutality of the crime suggested personal motives, and the fact that the killer had cut off and taken some of her hair could be connected to his obsession. Detectives eventually obtained a search warrant for Robinson's house, where they found numerous photos of Lisa, further indicating his obsession with her. However, Robinson continued to deny any involvement in the murder. He even provided his fingerprints and DNA samples to the detectives. Although the detectives were almost certain that Robinson was the killer, the lab results showed no match between the samples found at the victim's apartment and Robinson's. Consequently, Robinson was removed from the list of suspects, and the police continued their search for new leads. Despite their efforts, the detectives repeatedly hit dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for years. Investigators repeatedly sought updates on the comparison of the killer's DNA sample and fingerprints with databases, hoping that he would surface for some other crimes, but it never happened. Initially, police found it strange that someone who committed such a brutal crime wasn't in the databases, as they doubted it was his first serious offense. Over the following years, police continued to check for matches in the databases, but they always came up empty. Lisa's mother gave interviews on television multiple times, urging anyone with information to come forward. But detectives still couldn't find any new leads. In 2010, detectives learned that the FBI had started using a new DNA technology to compare suspect samples with individuals in the database to locate their relatives. Unlike genetic genealogy, which emerged several years later, this method only worked with close relatives. For example, experts could find the father or a brother of the DNA owner in the database. With no other leads, in 2011, the police requested such a DNA comparison and began waiting. On September 2nd, the lead detective received a call from the FBI with two pieces of news, one good and one bad. They stated they would not perform the comparison with possible relatives in the database. But the reason was quite unexpected. Before conducting such a comparison, experts always retest the suspect's DNA sample, and this time, 13 years after the murder, it came back as a perfect match. The DNA from the blood and skin particles found under Lisa's nails matched the sample from a 52-year-old man named Anthony Hughes, who had just recently entered the FBI database. The man had an extensive criminal history spanning decades, but none of his crimes required his DNA sample to be entered into the FBI database. With changes in laws, criminals in California were required to submit DNA samples regardless of the severity of the crime, and Anthony's sample ended up in the database after he was arrested for a simple shoplifting incident. His fingerprints were also entered into the databases, and they matched the fingerprint found on the toilet seat in Lisa's apartment. Experts even identified the specific finger that left the print. Pretty easily before arresting the man, detectives attempted to find any other evidence that could connect him to the crime. Here, they encountered a surprising turn of events. 13 years ago, the police listened to messages left for Lisa on her answering machine. However, they only reviewed calls made to her phone before the murder. Now, after all these years, detectives suddenly discovered that Anthony Hughes had called Lisa just a day after her death and left her a message. Its content was quite ordinary and did not raise any suspicions. However, had the police investigated Anthony back then, they would have not only discovered his extensive criminal record, but also something else. Upon reviewing Lisa's belongings, detectives examined her address book and found Anthony's phone number, confirming that the victim knew him. After talking to Lisa's friends, the police learned that she had apparently dated Anthony for a while in high school. And now, the detectives had everything they needed to question the man. At that time, he didn't have a fixed address, so they decided to proceed carefully to prevent the suspect from fleeing. They arrested him, saying that the police were investigating a series of robberies in San Francisco, and he surrendered without resistance. During the interrogation, detectives started by asking about a series of robberies before smoothly transitioning to Anthony's criminal record. Eventually, they asked if he knew Lisa Valdez. At first, he said no, but when they showed her photo, he admitted they knew each other from high school. Anthony also claimed he hadn't seen her since the late 80s. Over several hours, detectives questioned him about the relationship and whether he'd seen her recently. Finally, they confronted him about his DNA found in Lisa's apartment in '98. Anthony suddenly began crying and asked for a pen and paper. Thinking he was ready to confess, they handed it over, but to their surprise, the man started hitting himself with the pen. They had to restrain him while he continued crying and shouting that they were trying to frame him for a crime he didn't commit. After that, Anthony was charged with the murder, and detectives informed Lisa's relatives that her killer had finally been caught. However, they had to wait another 4 years before the trial began in court. Anthony initially appeared confident, even arrogant, and smirked. But as the proceedings continued, he began showing up with a Bible in hand and a cross around his neck, which the detectives saw as an attempt to sway the jurors. His lawyer insisted Anthony couldn't physically have committed the murder. He had been diagnosed with a condition 5 years prior that weakened his muscles, making repetitive movements extremely difficult. The lawyer argued that Anthony wouldn't have been able to inflict over 20 stab wounds on the victim. But medical reports from the year of the murder showed that Anthony's condition was under control and treatment was effective. Moreover, the prosecution had much stronger evidence pointing directly to his presence in the victim's apartment. His skin was found under Lisa's nails, his blood on a pillowcase, and his fingerprint on the toilet seat. But despite all this, Anthony continued to insist he hadn't seen Lisa since the late 80s. The prosecution theorized that Anthony contacted Lisa and went to her home, where he attempted to engage in intimacy with her, but she refused. In a fit of rage, he then killed her, cut off a portion of her hair, and took it with him before fleeing the scene. In the end, the jury unanimously found him guilty of first-degree murder. However, there was a problem with convicting him of sexual assault. The prosecution believed Anthony had indeed assaulted the victim, but due to the extent of decomposition, there was no direct evidence to confirm it. The situation was further complicated when, before sentencing, Anthony challenged the assault charges, arguing that the 13-year delay in bringing charges violated his constitutional rights. As a result, the primary charges were reduced from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, resulting in a less severe punishment. Anthony eventually received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after just 16 years in 2031, when he would be 72. Since then, Anthony has been serving his sentence in prison and continues to maintain his innocence. Lisa's relatives hope that his parole request will be denied, which is quite likely. As often, a refusal to admit guilt is seen by the parole board as a lack of remorse, meaning the offender doesn't deserve to be released. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Allison Baden Clay. Allison Baden was born on July 1, 1968 in a Brisbane suburb. Raised in an affluent family, she developed a passion for ballet early on. After school, she pursued higher education, excelling academically and mastering 6 languages. At 25 in 1993, Allison won a local beauty pageant, showcasing her ballet skills. Following university, she secured a position in the HR department at Brisbane's Flight Centre, where her career quickly advanced, recognized by her boss as a bright and promising talent. It was here that Allison met Gerard, who would later become her husband. Gerard Baden Clay was born on September 9, 1970, in Bournemouth, UK. He came from a notable lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden Powell, being a famed British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard was just a year old when his family moved to Zambia, his father Nigel Clay's homeland. After 8 years in Zambia, they immigrated to Australia. Gerard completed his education in Australia and pursued a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Flight Centre for work, where he met Allison's. It was at the Flight Centre where Gerard encountered Allison, leading to a blossoming relationship. Gerard and Allison Baden Clay exchanged vows on August 23, 1997. Following their nuptials, they embarked on a global tour, including stops in South America, Switzerland, and a stint in London. Once back in Australia, Allison resumed her career at the Flight Centre, eventually rising to a management position. In 2002, she became pregnant and later gave birth to their first child, Hannah. After Hannah's birth, Allison chose to dedicate herself entirely to family life. During this period, Gerard explored various occupations and established a premium real estate agency in Brisbane in 2004, with his parents' involvement in the business. Known for his lively and self-assured demeanor, Gerard dedicated substantial time and effort to his work. The family grew with the birth of their second daughter, Sarah, in 2004, and their youngest, Ella, in 2006. They lived in a verdant home situated in the suburban area of Brookfield, Brisbane. Allison, primarily a homemaker, was deeply engaged in caring for her daughters. Over time, Allison noticed that Gerard was becoming increasingly distant and aloof. This reached a climax when he made the shocking admission that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Allison changed, with him frequently criticizing her. He would berate her for making unappealing meals or for not keeping their home clean, sometimes labeling Allison as lazy and expressing that she no longer appealed to him romantically. In the face of these remarks, Allison chose to remain quiet, enduring the harshness of his words. She maintained a personal diary where she documented her enduring love for Gerard, the recurring disputes at home, her own feelings of guilt, and her determination to correct her perceived faults in hopes of rekindling his affection. Despite the turmoil within her family life, Allison managed to mask her inner struggles with an outward appearance of cheerfulness. She was consistently seen as a warm, benevolent individual, a devoted mother, and a loving spouse. In 2011, after the devastating floods in Queensland, Gerard's business faced financial difficulties, accumulating debts of approximately $1 million Australian dollars. That October, Allison discovered that Gerard was engaged in a secret affair with Tony McHugh, a colleague at his agency. Gerard and Tony had first crossed paths in 2008 when she was a client, and later, he hired her. At that time, Tony, a 17-year marriage veteran with children, was experiencing marital troubles. The affair with Gerard quickly escalated, culminating in her divorce. Tony was aware of Gerard's marital status. He had portrayed his relationship with Allison as platonic, claiming their marriage lacked intimacy and that he remained with Allison solely for their daughters. Gerard assured Tony of a future together, including marriage. However, after nearly 4 years, Gerard had still not initiated divorce proceedings when Allison discovered the affair in October 2011. Gerard informed Tony that they had to end their relationship. He terminated the affair, dismissed Tony from his real estate business, and reconciled with his wife without Tony, who held on to the hope of a future together. 4 months later, Tony and Gerard were conversing over the phone while she drove home. They talked about an upcoming real estate conference scheduled for the next day. Unexpectedly, Gerard mentioned that Tony would encounter Allison there. Upset by this foreseen development, Tony questioned Gerard's delay in telling her and accused him of habitual dishonesty in response to her frustration and doubts about their future. Gerard apologized, reaffirmed his love, and reiterated his commitment to divorcing within 3 months. He emphasized his intention to leave Allison, mentioning her mental health struggles. The following morning, on April 20th at 7:14 a.m., a distressed Gerard contacted the police, reporting Allison's disappearance after a walk around 10 p.m. the previous night. Upon arrival at the Bowden Clay home, police observed deep curved scratches on Gerard's face, which he attributed to a shaving accident. During a further examination for photographs, police noticed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained as bites from a caterpillar encountered while changing an outdoor light. The house inspection revealed no overt signs of disturbance. It was orderly with the bed neatly made. Gerard was composed, getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who recalled falling asleep to their mother's lullabies and hadn't seen her since she turned off the light. The girls, tearful during questioning, described their parents as generally happy and good to each other. The police initiated a search in the vicinity and interviewed neighbors for any leads on Allison's whereabouts, but no one reported seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary. The only clues discovered that day were a small blood stain in Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A larger-scale search operation was soon underway, with rescue teams and volunteers scouring the nearby woods, wells, shafts, and dams close to the Bowden Clay residence. A mannequin was placed, dressed similarly to Allison's last known attire, to aid in the search efforts. As time progressed, the likelihood of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, unwilling to consider the worst. Gerard, visibly distraught, tearfully spoke to the media, yearning for his wife's return. Concurrently, he advised his mistress, Tony, to halt their communication and keep a low profile, promising that they would eventually be together. A decade after Allison vanished, on April 30th, 2012, a boater found a decomposed body by the Colo Creek riverbank, around 8 miles from the Bowden Clay home. The next day, Gerard reached out to the insurance company to discuss claiming his wife's life insurance, valued at $800,000 Australian dollars. Shortly after, the body discovered under the bridge was confirmed as the 43-year-old Allison Bowden Clay by a medical examiner. The advanced decomposition made determining the exact cause of death challenging. Dental records confirmed Allison's identity, and she was dressed in the same outfit as when she disappeared. Forensic indications pointed to possible strangulation, leading to the classification of her death as a homicide. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Church hosted Allison Bowden Clay's funeral. Gerard, visibly distraught, shed tears throughout the service, consoling his daughters and extending solace to Allison's parents. The ceremony saw a large turnout, with hundreds in attendance. Concurrently, Gerard maintained discreet contact with his mistress, Toni, using public phones for communication. He apprised her of the tragic circumstances surrounding his wife's death and implored Toni to keep their clandestine relationship hidden from police inquiries. Gerard maintained his claim that Allison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone by the time he woke up. However, contradictory evidence emerged. Detectives found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., searching for information about the right to remain silent. Forensic analysis contradicted his claim of shaving cuts, suggesting the marks on his cheek resembled fingernail scratches. Additionally, no blood was detected on his razor. A biologist challenged Gerard's explanation of caterpillar bites on his chest, noting the absence of such caterpillars in the family's area that could have caused such marks. A botanical specialist concluded that the marks were not consistent with caterpillar bites. When Allison's body was discovered, her hair contained 5 distinct leaf types: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, crepe myrtle, cat's claw vine, and fishbone fern. Notably, 2 of these varieties, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, grew directly under the bridge where her body was found. Significantly, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were present in the backyard of the Bowden Clay family residence a month after Allison's funeral on June 13, 2012. 41-year-old Gerard Bowden Clay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. Asserting his innocence, he vowed to fight the charges and sought bail, which was promptly denied due to concerns he might flee during questioning. Investigators contacted Toni, who disclosed the truth about their 4-year clandestine relationship. Notably, just days before Allison's disappearance, Gerard had sent Toni a letter promising that he would be with her by July 1st. The prosecution alleged that Gerard Bowden Clay murdered Allison to claim an insurance payout, clear his debts, and start anew with Toni McHugh. They theorized that on the night of April 19, 2012, after putting their daughters to bed, Allison joined Gerard to watch TV. An intense argument is believed to have erupted, during which Allison scratched Gerard's cheek. DNA traces were found under Allison's nails, but their origin was undetermined due to degradation. The prosecution suggested that Gerard strangled Allison, dragged her body through the backyard, entangling her hair with leaves, then transported her in her car's trunk to the river, disposing of her body under a bridge. They believed Gerard expected the river to wash the body away, concealing his crime. He reportedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Allison missing the next morning. After the discovery of the body, he sought legal counsel for criminal defense and visited the lawyer's office. At the June 2014 murder trial of Allison Bowden Clay, the prosecution adamantly argued for Gerard's guilt. Gerard, however, steadfastly denied any involvement. In court, he admitted to a dispute with Allison, suggesting she might have left home late at night and, in her depressive state, possibly chosen to end her life. This theory was staunchly rejected by Allison's family and friends, who were convinced of her unwavering commitment to her daughters, believing she would never abandon them. Her friends voiced long-standing disapproval of Gerard, describing him as arrogant, disingenuous, and conceited, and believed Allison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. At the trial, excerpts from Allison Bowden Clay's diary were presented, revealing her sense of isolation and control by Gerard, especially after their first child's birth. She felt lonely, confined to the home, and detailed Gerard's controlling behavior, including insulting her, tracking her conversations through a baby monitor, managing her finances, erasing relatives' contacts from her phone and blocking their calls. Following Allison's demise, Gerard's attempt to claim the insurance payout was rejected, with the funds being withheld pending the trial's conclusion. Another key testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person, but spoke with him on the phone in 2009 regarding a real estate deal. She testified that after finalizing the deal, Gerard made a startling call to her, proposing, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Romano, taken aback, questioned his motive, but Gerard abruptly shifted the conversation and ended the call, leaving the statement unresolved. Gerard Baden Clay was convicted on July 15, 2014, and sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 15 years. In 2015, he challenged his sentence, leading to a court ruling that the murder was unintentional and thus reducing his prison term. This verdict, however, triggered a massive public outcry, culminating in protests with about 4,000 participants standing in solidarity with Allison's family. Responding to the public sentiment, in 2016, the High Court of Australia overturned the appellate court's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. Consequently, Gerard Baden Clay's parole eligibility has been deferred until at least 2027, while incarcerated. Initially, Gerard conducted himself as an exemplary inmate, but as time progressed, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he inappropriately touched a prison guard, resulting in a stern reprimand during his imprisonment. Gerard Baden Clay also established a friendship with a 73-year-old businessman and millionaire, John Chardan, who was imprisoned for the manslaughter of his wife. Additionally, he developed a rapport with Mayan Carouse, a convict serving time for the triple homicide of his girlfriend and her two siblings. Following the trial of Gerard Baden Clay, his former mistress, Toni McHugh, moved to Bali, where she engaged in teaching and charity work. 4 years later, she relocated to the United Arab Emirates to continue her career in education. McHugh now leads a modest lifestyle and keeps her personal details under wraps. She occasionally connects with friends via social media using an anonymous account, cautious of Baden Clay potentially locating her post-release. In her most recent media interaction, McHugh expressed remorse about the situation and clarified that she never intended harm to Allison. She also disclosed that Baden Clay and Clay had been unfaithful to Allison with not only her but other women as well, including Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, the daughters of Gerard and Allison Baden Clay. The children, Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, are being cared for by their maternal grandparents, Allison's parents. The entirety of Allison's estate, including any insurance money, was entrusted to her children in 2022. The eldest daughter, Hannah Baden Clay, has completed her university education and has pursued a career in dancing, following in her mother's footsteps to honor Allison's memory. To address the critical issue of domestic violence, Allison's sister, Vanessa, founded a charitable organization dedicated to combating domestic abuse, raising awareness, and providing support to those impacted by such situations. Through this case, being able to recognize the signs of domestic and family violence is a crucial first step towards prevention. In Allison's case, there were numerous indicators, some more conspicuous than others. These signs included, but were not limited to, a sense of isolation from friends, family, and support systems, a significant degree of control over financial resources, and a gradual erosion of self-confidence and self-worth. Identifying these things early on is essential in order to address the underlying issues and provide the necessary support and resources to those affected by domestic and family violence. By being vigilant and attuned to the subtle and overt manifestations of this complex issue, we can take proactive measures to foster safer and more supportive environments for individuals and families. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Cassandra Cantrell. Fear is a negative and unpleasant feeling. Would anyone want to experience it over and over again? Cassandra Cantrell and her twin brother Rob were the exception. As young children, they couldn't go a day without the scary stories they liked to tell each other in a room with the lights off. Rob was a natural storyteller, or at least he thought he was. Cassandra would scream at every story he told, and he, playing the brave though small man, would sprawl on his bed. They also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together, and while watching it, they argued over which of the characters in the story would turn out to be a ghost or a vampire in disguise. Cassandra's intuitive guesses were often ahead of her brother, and then he was nervous. Their mother, Mary Smith, although she did not share the same passion as the twins, bought them books by Robert Wall to instill a love of reading in her children. A love for scary stories was not just a childhood hobby, but a lifelong passion that the brother and sister shared. They even collected figurines of villains, and as adults, seriously considered opening a themed store associated with this culture of horror. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004, where she got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy in Rob, and he started asking his sister to make a deal for him. Rob was very happy, but to play, albeit in an episodic role, he was not able to. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, and on the set, between him and debuting actress Cassandra, flashed a spark. To make the first step, each of them did not dare, but that all changed during a corporate Halloween party. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, and Colin dressed up as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. For Cassandra, the image of the cartoon character was just an image. But for Colin Dudley, it seemed to be something more. He walked around with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare just as his character did in the movie, and he also talked a lot of quotes from the book. For example, looking at Cassandra with delight, he said, "Beauty invariably caused my only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into our ugly world." Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they soon began dating, but their relationship didn't last long. Only a couple of months later, Colin found another actress, Rebecca, and started dating her, and later the couple started living together. On August 25, 2020, Cassandra Cantrell disappeared. She, without warning anyone, drove her car away from home in an unknown direction and did not answer phone calls. The police officers were very reluctant to take a report from her mother for a very long time, trying to calm the poor woman down and saying that sometimes children grow up and don't always warn their parents when they go out with friends. But Mary Smith was sure that something terrible had happened. And maybe if the lazy cops would finally start working, she would still have a chance to see her daughter alive. The search for Cassandra did not begin until 2 days later, and on the third day, the police found her car under a bridge, not in the most favorable area. Also, to add to the bad news, the car was unlocked and the keys were inside. It was impossible to understand what Cassandra was doing here. This place was considered a neighborhood of homeless people, where, with frequent frequency, the police found their bodies killed in a domestic fight or died of an overdose of illegal drugs. The officers had to go around the neighborhood questioning a lot of homeless people who, at the sight of the police, tried to get away for a while. But it was all to no avail. None of them had seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car showed up there. It was hard to expect anything else from the residents who lived under the bridge and drank alcohol all day long. The detective involved in the search for Cassandra had requested her cell phone billing, as he was instructed to do, but from experience, he was sure it would get him nowhere, and so it did. The signal showed that the phone was in the nearest body of water to the bridge, which meant that the detectives would not be able to recover it and get the information they needed. Nevertheless, a team of divers began searching the coastal area, and before they did so, standing on the shore, they picked up rocks from the ground and threw them into the water, testing how far they could throw the phone. Cassandra's mother said that her missing daughter's phone case was decorated with rhinestones, which meant it would not be difficult to find. Indeed, the phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not in the water. This things was presented to her mother as good news, but the poor woman did not feel any better. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found and for this nightmare of uncertainty to end. Cassandra, as it seemed to her mother, despite her already realized age, was not married and did not even meet anyone. It was understandable that she had gotten pregnant by a man, but Mary had no information about the father of the child. Although, again from the words of her mother, her daughter very often corresponded with someone and called, but the phone number of her interlocutor, for some reason, was not recorded in the daughter's book, and the mother, of course, did not remember the numbers. She just noticed that it is quite strange to communicate so often with a person and not write down his number. Cassandra could not keep their relationships in absolute secrecy, and there should be at least one friend with whom Cassandra shared her secrets, and especially if those secrets were related to pregnancy. Such a friend was found, and in a conversation with police officers, she revealed that Cassandra had rekindled her relationship with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Yes, their past relationship in 2004 was short-lived, and besides, it's been 15 years since their breakup. It is strange in general that after so much time, they remembered each other. As it turned out, Colin himself came out to Cassandra, with whom he once worked on a movie set in 2014. He found Cassandra on Facebook, wrote some warm words, and confessed that just recently his father died, with whom his wife, Rebecca, had a difficult relationship, and so he had no one to share his grief with. Cassandra, purely because of friendly motives, decided to meet and talk to the ex-boyfriend to calm him down, but the friendly meeting turned into something more. Since 2014, Colin began to live literally on two families, where Cassandra was in the status of mistress. When the young woman found out that she was pregnant, she did not want to inform Colin Dudley because every time she wanted to admit it to him, she recalled their conversation, where Colin said that he absolutely did not want children and that he was very happy about Rebecca being infertile. The news that he might have a daughter or son could destroy a real family, and Cassandra didn't want to hurt her lover, so she kept the news a secret. Meanwhile, her belly was growing, and it was impossible to hide it under the oversized sweaters, and in order for Colin not to guess anything, Cassandra stopped seeing him. But she couldn't hide it for long, and if she lied about having another boyfriend, it would hurt Colin and cause them to break up. Cassandra decided that the bitter truth was better than a sweet lie, so she told Colin over the phone that she was expecting a child with him. Colin was silent for a while, and then he finally said that he was delighted to hear the news. It sounded very strange, but Cassandra concluded that Colin was genuinely pleased. The detective arrived at Colin's house, knocked on the door, and his wife opened it. Deciding that it wasn't quite ethical to talk about a missing mistress in the presence of Colin's legal wife, the detective introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's. Colin came out immediately, shut the door behind him, and walked away from the house with the detective, though the latter hadn't even introduced himself yet. It was as if he had been waiting for this meeting. "Thank you for not making your credentials public in front of Rebecca. You're a man of honor, a true officer. My compliments to you," Colin spoke in short sentences. "I heard Cassandra is missing. It's weird, bloody weird. I can't even guess where. She might have gone. She told me she'd had a big fight with her brother and was really worried about it. I advised her to stop by and make up with him. I don't know if she listened to me or not." That Cassandra and Rob had been in a fight, the detective knew. Rob had told him about it himself. It was nothing serious, just a family misunderstanding. But nevertheless, Cassandra's twin brother had been very upset about it because the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called him and wanted to come and talk to him. But his proud brother had refused, and now he blamed himself for it. If his sister had come to see him that day, she wouldn't have disappeared. "You know, officer, I'm not the nicest person. I think you realize that. Dating my ex-girlfriend in secret from my wife and for such a long period of time. I'm sure I'll be punished for it in the next world, but the human heart doesn't decide who you fall in love with. In 2014, my father died. He literally hated Rebecca with all his soul, and the feeling was mutual, but he really liked Cassandra. He often remembered her, reproached me for the fact that we broke up with her almost immediately after Christmas. We often fight with our parents, accusing them of not understanding, and then it turns out that it's us, their children, who don't understand, and it hurts. My father was right, of course, and after he died I just wanted to fulfill one of his wishes, and so I resumed my relationship with Cassandra. Rebecca needed to be broken up with. It was a conversation I kept putting off, you know. This family stuff sucks you dry, so I kept stalling. I've been living a double life for 5 years. It was hell. I had to make excuses for coming home late all the time to hide it. I'd tell her about some fictitious business trips and even bought a fishing rod, even though I hated fishing, a stupid pastime. And I'd tell Rebecca I was going to the lake while I went to Cassandra's before coming home. I'd buy fish at the supermarket for extra convincing, and Rebecca would bake it in the oven, and I'd eat it, even though the smell of fish makes me sick. The detective said, "Did you know Cassandra was pregnant?" Dudley replied in surprise, "Pregnant by whom?" The detective then explained, "I don't have that information, but she told a close friend of hers that it was from you." Dudley affirmed that can't be true. She's been adamantly refusing to see him lately, and he understand her and can't blame her for that. Naturally, she was tired of being in the background and wanted a family, which unfortunately he couldn't give her. He guessed that the reason she refused to see him was because she had found someone else. The detective asked Colin when he last saw Cassandra. Colin claimed that the last time he saw her was about 3 or 4 months ago. This was not Colin's last encounter with the detective. Even though Cassandra's phone, which was lifted from the bottom of the pond and could not be recovered, the police requested the details of the calls of the missing person, and it turned out that most likely the unsigned number about which her mother told her belongs to Colin Dudley. Most often, Cassandra called him, and even on the day of her disappearance, they called each other. In addition, on that day, the police received CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge where Cassandra's abandoned car had been found, and on it they saw a strange man who stood out in the crowd of passengers on the platform. He wore a long cloak, gloves, his face was hidden in a scarf, and a hat was placed on his head, the sides of which covered his eyes. It was impossible to make out the face, but the detective said that the man's gait reminded him very much of Colin Dudley. As for the hat, it was almost identical to the one worn by Alex from A Clockwork Orange. After continuing to follow the strange man through the CCTV cameras, the detectives noticed that he literally went into the cafe for a few minutes, then came out of there and went towards the parking lot where he got into his car and drove away. During all this time, the stranger never showed his face, but they could see the license plate number of the car in which the stranger got into, and the car belonged to Colin Dudley. A unit was sent to his house with a search warrant. The detectives had initially believed that Cassandra was alive and in the basement of Dudley's house. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house. However, in the closet, they found the very hat that Colin was trying to cover himself with. They then went down to the basement, but Cassandra was not there, nor was there any evidence of the crime. However, the service dog, trained to search by the scent of blood, barked as it sniffed the couch, which was already a very alarming sign. Colin assured the police that he had done nothing illegal and that they simply had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to pin the crime on him, an innocent man. The detective interviewed his wife, who was shocked at what was going on in their home, the accusations against her husband, and the fact that she had been deceived for years. When the detective asked her if her husband was capable of murder, she answered in the negative after thinking about it for a long time. The evidence found against Colin was not enough to put him in jail, which made Rob and Mary Smith very angry. The detective was just throwing up his hands. Colin was called in for questioning again, and he thought carefully about the crime, as he had an alibi for all the allegations on the morning of August 25th at 6:30 a.m. Colin visited a hardware store where he purchased household cleaning chemicals and trash bags, and the store's cameras confirmed this. However, the large trash bags overshadowed this situation. Colin then received a text message from Cassandra that she was almost at his house, but he immediately deleted the message. But it remained in the cell phone carrier's memory, and the police got it from the call and message dump. Also, according to their cell phone billing, the couple did not leave the house that morning for several hours. Colin then turned off his phone but left his mistress's phone on, most likely by accident, and the police saw the entire path of his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. As the police already knew, after the cafe where he was probably recovering from the murder by washing up in the toilet, Colin got into his car and drove to the pond where he had dumped Cassandra's phone, where the last signal from the cell phone had been received. It was now necessary to search for Cassandra's body, and the police, in order to accurately track the route, seized a GPS tracker from Colin's car. The device completely replicated the movement of Cassandra's cell phone signal, but there was new evidence in the case based on his movements. The next day, the cops retraced his path that went through the woods, and there, in a ravine, they spotted a huge trash can tied with ropes. All the ground around it was covered in blood, and it became clear what was in the container. By then, it had been a month since the murder, and identifying the body was difficult. The police were helped by Cassandra's tattoo, which was described in the search notes. Colin was apprehended the same day and charged with murder. Forensics conducted a forensic examination and indicated that death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the examination of the basement of the Dudley house, the police found traces of blood that could not be completely cleaned. Rebecca knew nothing about the murder, as she spent all day in another part of the house, from which no noise in the basement could be heard. She also confirmed that Colin never wanted children, and his story about her infertility was just a fiction, which the police took as a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to the lack of witnesses and physical evidence, such as the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that the murder was committed by Colin Dudley. Then the court made a deal with the killer that if he pleaded guilty, he would get a lesser sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and her brother, who still felt guilty that he had not agreed to meet with his sister before her death, were very upset because the killer would most likely live to see the moment when he could go free. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, there was a brutal and cynical murder that even surprised the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Arellano, who worked as a paramedic. It is shocking to discover who her executioner was. The circumstances surrounding the tragic incident were quite puzzling, leading the police to initially consider the possibility that Elizabeth may have passed away of her own volition. However, this theory was contradicted by the accounts provided by accidental witnesses who observed the horrific scene. The investigation required extensive efforts to thoroughly understand the events and bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite the brutality of the crime committed, many felt that the sentence imposed was overly lenient and unjust. Elizabeth Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young and showed no interest in the fate of his daughter, not contacting her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. She studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a man named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon entered a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents. But they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen partner seemed to them a serious and quite reliable man. At the age of 16, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth married her partner. Legally, the couple had 4 children, one after the other, 3 sons and a daughter. However, despite the presence of multiple heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a homemaker. She recalled her childhood aspiration, so Elizabeth completed medical school and secured employment as a paramedic, with the intention of pursuing further education to become a physician. The young woman was kind and devout, raised in the Christian faith. She took her children to church regularly, instilling in them a love and compassion for their fellow human beings. Family and friends described her as a very caring person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph appeared strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to show signs of strain. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife earlier, trying to control every aspect of her life, but over time, his behavior became simply intolerable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to her parents' house. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his outbursts of anger. Additionally, she did not want the children to listen to their parents' arguments almost every day, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and the impending divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So on the evening of April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old woman, accompanied by her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and enjoyed herself, but did not consume any alcohol because she intended to drive home in her own car, which she had used to arrive at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. After parking the car, she called her friend with whom she had spent the evening at the club and told her that she had already reached home and was doing fine. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never went inside the house. The next morning, Juanita, her mother, was very worried when she found that her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned a long time ago. Elizabeth could not have left somewhere without informing anyone, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was not locked. The key remained in the ignition, and her daughter's purse and phone lay on the vacant seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal effects unattended in the unlocked vehicle, implying something dreadful had transpired. She promptly contacted the authorities, reporting a missing person. The police were confident they could swiftly resolve the matter, as they say, while fresh. Furthermore, there was still hope Elizabeth was alive, as the car showed no signs of blood or struggle. Yet, the situation was far from straightforward. The investigation started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline of events on the evening and night in question, tracing Elizabeth's entire route to find and question all potential witnesses, beginning with the friends and colleagues she had spent time with before her disappearance. They provided the exact time when she returned home, and later Elizabeth herself had called to confirm her safe arrival. Additionally, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to reach her that night, were found on the missing person's phone, but Elizabeth had not responded to any of them. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to him, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, He sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. He assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years, and she was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of Elizabeth, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. He said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4 o'clock in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so he could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found, walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a theory was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily, against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. However, the question remained as to who, and for what reason, could have so brutally murdered a mother of many children. Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone could have been guarding her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of Elizabeth, Rudolph, continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the list of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, Rudolph displayed an emotional performance, weeping at the coffin of his ex-wife and expressing a desire to be in her place or die alongside her. According to his sister, Elizabeth, he even believed the sincerity of his own words. Additionally, Rudolph actively assisted in the establishment of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. The investigation determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near Elizabeth's house, and it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which she had been thrown. When the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions became even more complex. It turned out that he made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages, trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son, who stated that he had seen the rope removed from his mother's neck earlier in the backyard of his father's house and recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before. The investigation found that Rudolph waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete, and then drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. In January 2019, Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Stephen Freeman. The victim, Stephen Andrew Freeman, was born on January 1, 1995, in Thomason, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Stephen had many friends, and everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Stephen grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, and friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Stephen fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to indicate he was in a relationship and regularly shared various photos with his partner. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend, and Steve's parents also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young couple moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drain W Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a sales associate at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018 at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, she was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where she, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life, and she would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation, where the investigators used aggressive tactics. They yelled at her, expressed skepticism about her account, and demanded the truth. This approach was effective, and Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in a fit of anger. She explained that they had a heated argument, and she wanted to leave him. The investigators had recorded the conversation and obtained a confession, indicating a case that had been resolved. However, a significant technical issue arose, resulting in the loss of most of the recording, with only background interference and indistinct noises remaining. The reason for this loss and the lack of a backup copy of this crucial evidence remained unexplained. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have been fired accidentally, as it required a deliberate trigger pull. Additionally, for the bullet to have struck Stephen in the way it did, the pistol had to have been pointed directly at the victim. Detectives also closely examined Mary's behavior, with some suspecting that she may have been overacting and exaggerating her distress. The detectives remained diligent, carefully piecing together their theory of the tragedy based on the emerging evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident in Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that she worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. She changed her statement several times, and her hysterical state sometimes interrupted the interrogation. However, she reiterated that it was an accident. In another conversation, Mary Catherine told the police that at Stephen's request, she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This did not match what she had told the investigators at the scene and during the first interrogation, where she repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Stephen the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt or concealment. Mary was detained and held in the Spalding County Jail during her trial. She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm while committing a crime. Lieutenant Wilson strongly disputed Mary's claim that it was an accident and tried to prove that her actions were a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point, the magazine must have been emptied, bullets were loaded, and the pistol was then placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she was indeed preparing dinner for Stephen that evening, and the dinner found scattered on the kitchen floor explained the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary, until their relationship nearly ended and then reignited with new passion. It became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often argued over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a dramatic event, screaming at Stephen and attacking him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen to frustration. The guy shared with friends that during arguments and fights, Mary pointed a pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Stephen never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. There were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Stephen's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy on July 30th, 2018, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil, and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act driven by Mary Catherine's anger. However, her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pleaded guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently, repeatedly claiming it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her, claiming he hit her twice and even forced himself on her on the day of the tragedy, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately. Allegedly, on the night of the incident, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and shot at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that physical evidence supported the claim that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. The evidence presented included the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence, indicating that Stephen was not attacking Mary but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, the blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's theory was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment, and finally believing in the gravity of the situation, Mary Catherine made the risky decision to provide truthful testimony. With tears in her eyes, in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant and presented specific evidence. She managed to do so, and the defense stuck to the self-defense narrative. They presented the argument that a scandal had erupted between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in self-defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, she experienced all kinds of imaginable pressure: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated her, needing to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, how she was spending money, and even what she was eating. He drove her to despair with unreasonable jealousy. She never reported him to the police because she loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support their claims. This included not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between Mary and Stephen, not only proved Stephen's harsh behavior towards Mary Catherine, but also Mary's infidelity. Some message excerpts showed Stephen insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was that, as confirmed by his friends, he was very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Stephen had sexually assaulted her twice, and she feared he would harm her again on August 1st, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert witness and close relatives of Mary who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified affirmatively, stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing the injuries and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on the night of the incident, she decided to break up with Stephen, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became angry and attacked her, and in self-defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle with Stephen's former friends who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend. Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, while portraying Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed that over the last few years, Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and on one occasion, pointing a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine would obsessively call Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. In Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she omitted a crucial detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary extensively discussed their troubled relationship and how, after years of harmony, it had deteriorated into physical abuse. However, she never mentioned the moment when she pulled the trigger in supposed self-defense. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard remained unconvinced by Mary's account, noting that during cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Stephen. Repeatedly, the prosecutor asked Mary Catherine whether a woman feeling safe at home would pursue her assailant late at night to bring him back. The answer was unsatisfactory, and the prosecutor continued, vividly describing the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the scene as she envisioned it. According to her theory, Stephen came home, and after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Enraged, Mary scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed, likely waiting for her to calm down. But Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck on the left side. Since he hadn't turned to face her in her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting, hence he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded, but detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1, 2018, when Mary was preparing a rope for Stephen. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Did Mary Catherine really load the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Stephen Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict, not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. The defendant was found not guilty on the first charge of malicious action and not guilty on the second charge of serious action. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked, watching the person who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom. Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors, and everyone who supported Stephen's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Stephen Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Stephen lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Stephen showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident by analyzing and presenting the situation. It's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sierra Lamar. The story begins in Fremont, California. Sierra Lamar's family, consisting of her father Steve, a computer expert, her mother Marlene, and her older sister Danielle, lived in Fremont. Sierra was born on October 19, 1996, while Danielle was around 4 years her senior. The family experienced some common ups and downs. It was later discovered that when Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father Steve had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with one of their school classmates during a sleepover. This led to his 1-year imprisonment. Despite Steve's prior convictions, Sierra and Danielle said they got along well with him and that he had always been a kind and respected father. However, after the incident, Steve and Marlene decided to end their relationship. Marlene eventually decided to relocate from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a city located approximately 40 miles southwest of Fremont. She made this move together with Sierra and her boyfriend, Rick Gardner. Sierra was initially disappointed to be leaving her close friends and hobbies behind, but she eventually settled in at her new school, made new friends, and even rejoined the cheerleading squad. On March 11, 2012, Sierra called her parents in Fremont to update them on her progress. The discussion was mostly joyful, as she was enthusiastic about one of her upcoming school tasks and mentioned wanting to get her hair colored. The next time she went to Fremont, she told her sister all about her homework. She was obviously doing quite well in her academics. Sierra ended the chat with Danielle and Steve shortly after dinner because it was a Thursday. She had school the next day, and it was getting late. They all agreed to part ways for the evening and promised to speak again soon. However, none of them realized that this would be Danielle and Steve's final conversation with Sierra. February 16, 2012, it was an ordinary workday back in Morgan Hill. The Gardner-Lamar family got ready for the day as usual around 6 in the morning. Rick awoke to head out to work shortly after, and Marlene arrived to kiss Sierra on the forehead before heading out to work as well. Sierra had to get ready for school and lock the house. At this point, at 6:29 a.m., she texted a friend before putting on her shoes and walking out the front door to catch the bus. Pito Hispanic Court was situated far from Sierra's high school and the rest of Morgan Hill. Sierra had to cross a deserted road between Palm and Dory Avenues every morning to catch the bus, just like many other children across America. While on her way at 7:11 a.m., she texted a friend to see if they could meet up before classes started. But when her school bus arrived at 7:15 a.m., just 4 minutes later, Sierra was not present. Sierra may have skipped class or even the entire school day because she didn't meet up with her friend. Her friends found it unusual that she didn't show up, but they didn't think it was wise to inform the school without her. The day proceeded as normal. Marlene routinely contacted Sierra after school to check on her, but found it unusual that her phone went straight to voicemail. However, she did not become worried. But when Marlene arrived home and saw that her daughter's room was still unoccupied, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to check if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, this was not the case. When Sierra called Danielle and a few of her friends, they all left the same message. Marlene started to panic when she called Sierra's high school and found out that Sierra had missed all her classes. After calling the authorities, officers were sent immediately to Pito Hispanic Court. However, since Sierra could have disappeared at any time, there was no clear starting point for the investigators. Those closest to Sierra, including several of her friends, were questioned first, and they were all very honest about the predicament that Sierra and her family were facing. Even though she was usually content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce had compelled her to leave her family and all of her old friends behind. Authorities believed that because she frequently made lighthearted and even serious comments about returning to Fremont, she had most likely left voluntarily. Despite the fact that the police downplayed Sierra's disappearance, other factors were moving in the exact opposite direction. She not only said nothing, but she also stopped posting anything to her social media accounts. She never arrived at the front door, her phone was off, and all calls went to voicemail. Naturally, Sierra's loved ones and friends were terrified. Thus, the massive search for Sierra Lamar got underway. Despite the police's ineffective attempts, the trail of evidence related to Sierra's disappearance is currently one of the longest, most intricate, and most fascinating cases I've ever covered. The investigation began on Sunday morning, 2 days after she vanished. Data forensics were examining the previous data from her phone when they discovered that it had sent a signal without any electrical activity in the middle of the night. The phone appeared to have been turned on briefly before being turned off again, and the coordinates on the phone led them to a field near Sierra's house. At dawn, a search team carefully combed through the fields where the phone had been detected, and after just a few minutes, they found it. The Samsung Galaxy that Sierra had been using was located near the road, and it had sustained significant physical damage. It was assumed that her phone had likely been thrown off the road. Investigators concluded that she had not turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they reasoned that the rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. What a fortunate coincidence. This was the conclusion of the story, which heavily relied on the authorities finding the woman's phone. The events that occurred were caused by a raindrop and a short circuit. Given the nature and circumstances of the case, the detectives found the possibility of the woman's phone being thrown from a moving vehicle to be particularly concerning, considering the lack of footprints, tire tracks, or any other visual evidence. The next day brought about yet another horrifying discovery. 2 kilometers from Sierra's house, a search crew found her backpack thrown just outside a barn. She had expected to go to school and was probably pushed away from her own essential items, as the bag included her schoolwork, inhaler, and money. Sadly, things only get worse from here. Additionally, a complete outfit, possibly the one she was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This ensemble included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. Her outfit was subjected to DNA testing, and the results were revealed. Her pants contained male foreign DNA, which suggested that she had likely been assaulted. Although the search had already intensified significantly in the days following Sierra's disappearance, the discovery of her phone and clothing sparked a fresh outpouring of local and international sympathy. Authorities received more than 1,000 fresh tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Several search teams were composed of more than 800 people. They examined every available lake and reservoir in the area, methodically combed over fields, and looked inside abandoned buildings. Sierra's name was a hot topic in the community, and posters for missing people were put up all over the place. Additionally, Sierra's parents offered a $10,000 reward to anyone with credible proof. However, despite their best efforts and those of the community, only a golf ball and a flipper were discovered. Investigators were closing in on a culprit, though the public was unaware. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, DNA on her pants matched a local man. All 57 registered sex offenders in the area were investigated, and Sierra's father was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Anlin Garcia Torres, a 21-year-old man with a troubled past, emerged as a suspect after a successful DNA match. The suspicious relationship between Sierra and Anlin caused detectives to place him under constant watch. Nobody knew if Sierra was still alive or not, but Anlin was the most likely to know at this specific moment. The officers thus took a number of steps to keep an eye on his whereabouts and means of communication. His phone was tapped, a GPS tracker was covertly placed in his car, and 2 undercover police investigators shifted into an RV next to his house. After finding that the RV park had cameras at the front door, investigators also started looking through security footage from the neighborhood around Anlin. They examined this film on the day of her disappearance to determine whether Anlin had left or arrived home. At 7 a.m. on the morning Sierra vanished, Anlin's travel time of 7 miles from his home to Sierra's was a perfect match for the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped, even though Anlin had departed for work at his normal time. Safeway's shift records showed that Annalyn did not show up for work on March 16th. When his management inquired further, they discovered additional unfavorable information about Annalyn. It turns out that just 3 years prior, 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts had occurred in this Safeway's parking lot. Thankfully, none of the perpetrators were ever formally recognized or detained. The only piece of evidence from each of these attempted kidnappings was a taser that the perpetrator had dropped. One of its batteries had a fingerprint on it. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, and only a direct one-to-one comparison could match it. The theory of Annalyn being the suspect seemed plausible, but when Annalyn's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a startling realization emerged. In reality, Annalyn was the suspect. The suspect was now in the hands of the investigators. He was positively identified as being present when Sierra vanished. His DNA was discovered on her pants, and he has a history of involvement in kidnappings. This was sufficient to detain him, question him, and seize his automobile for DNA testing. In spite of Annalyn's arrogance during the interview, the test results were unfavorable for him. He stated that the day Sierra vanished, he went fishing, that he had no idea who Sierra was, and that he was certain they would not discover anything. However, Annalyn did not end his interview before making a very peculiar revelation. Annalyn admitted to having the somewhat vile habit of masturbating while driving and disposing of the used tissue out the window. Additionally, he asserted that he had tossed out a used tissue in the precise spot where Sierra's bag was discovered on the morning she vanished. The cops didn't believe his absurd explanation. Annalyn Garcia Torres was formally detained on May 21, 2012, in connection with the disappearance of Sierra Lamar outside of his place of employment in a Safeway parking lot. This resulted from a number of distinct linkages between Sierra and Annalyn's vehicle. Her DNA was found on the interior door handle of the car's rear door, according to a DNA examination. Additionally, fibers from Annalyn's car seats matched those found on Sierra's clothing, and a piece of rope discovered inside his car included a hair strand from Sierra. This proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. But even after his arrest, the situation still had a serious flaw. Even though it might have looked evident what had happened to Sierra, her body had yet to be discovered. Could they really accuse Annalyn of first-degree murder in the absence of a body or a death that had been verified? Yes, in reality. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen said on May 19, 2014, that he would be requesting the death penalty against Annalyn, although Annalyn had previously entered a plea of not guilty to killing Sierra. There was little to no room for error given the overwhelming body of evidence that pointed to his guilt. All the way to the end, after being delayed, Annalyn's trial finally got underway on January 30, 2017. The trial was drawn out and stressful for all parties, with long arguments from the prosecution and defense during the more than 13 weeks of testimony. The defense team for Annalyn tried to argue that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields as a child may have psychologically affected his cognitive capacities, and therefore, the crime was not his fault. They considered this to be an interesting aspect of the trial. Additionally, they argued that he shouldn't be eligible for the death penalty because he had nothing to do with the toxic exposure. And under those circumstances, they claimed that this was a deficit he faced, which other people did not. In a last-ditch effort, Annalyn's defense team asked for a new trial after casting doubt on the reliability and honesty of the chief investigator and asserting that he had tampered with evidence in the past. This motion, though, was turned down. The jury convicted Annalyn Garcia Torres of Sierra Lamar's first-degree murder. On May 9, 2017, the evidence was so overwhelming against Annalyn that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Sierra's body has never been located and her death has not been proven. Sierra's mother addressed him directly in court and declared, "I find it inconceivable to do a horrific, violent crime. You have hurt both our family and your family deeply. You have taken away from Sierra what God has in store for her. but you also have the option to repent and let us know where she is. I often reflect on her and what has been taken away from me as a mother. Simply put, it's difficult to accept that this took place, though it's reality. I still assume it's a dream when I wake up every morning. As numerous of Sierra's kin read letters to him in the courtroom, Alan remained quiet and motionless, and he has continued to insist that he is innocent. It follows that he has never said where Sierra's body might be, and regrettably, nobody knows what exactly happened to her on the day that she vanished. Outside the evidence offered, Alan was formally given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Alan has remained largely silent and, despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, has only answered one letter. In this letter, Alan wrote, "I maintain my innocence, and I'm not going to discuss the matter." This letter is sent to a news reporter from Crone 4. I do not trust the news, as there is a lot of selective reporting that presents an often inaccurate picture. Like many others, I believe everyone has a right to be heard, but sadly, those times are long gone. Actually, I'm not sure why Alan continues to maintain his innocence, as this is as obvious as day because of his DNA on Sierra's possessions, Sierra's DNA in his car, his prior criminal history, and a precise timeline. At least it was crystal clear that he was involved in Sierra's disappearance. There is no way she would still be missing if she were still alive, claim friends and family. Over a period of 3 years, volunteers carried out over 100 searches within a 15-meter radius, putting in a combined 50,000 man-hours of search effort in search of any information about the missing young woman. Even now, volunteers continue to search desperately for Sierra Lamar. The majority of them are aware that Sierra is probably deceased, but they still want to return her to her family and provide them with the closure they need. Nobody is certain where Sierra's body may be at this time, but hopefully, one day the Lamar family will receive the closure they seek. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Beatriz Lebre. In Lisbon, Portugal, a city known for its rich history and vibrant culture, a tragic true crime story unfolded. A promising young woman named Beatriz Lebre went missing, captivating the nation's attention as her disappearance made headlines for days. Tragically, her body was later found in a river in an advanced state of decomposition, requiring dental records to confirm her identity. The marks on her hands indicated that she had desperately tried to defend herself, and her head also bore signs of brutal injury. Let's explore the events that led to this shocking violence. Who was responsible for hurting her, and what motivated them? Come with me as I guide you through the sequence of events that built up to this tragic incident and the consequences that followed. Beatriz Lebre was born on June 7, 1997, in a small town situated near Spain's border. As she grew up, she cultivated a profound passion for music, literature, and assisting others. She was the cherished sole child of Paula and Carlos Lebre. Beatriz was a talented pianist and an enthusiastic reader, with a strong interest in psychology and human conduct. Beatriz had a dream of becoming a psychologist. To pursue this dream, she moved over 100 miles away to Lisbon and began studying psychology at the University Institute of Lisbon. She lived in her uncle's apartment in Sheila, along with her cousin. After successfully completing her 3-year bachelor's degree, she decided to further her education and enrolled in a master's degree program in social and organizational psychology. To supplement her income, she worked part-time at a Disney store. Beatriz was a sociable person who easily made new friends. She was well known and liked by her teachers, classmates, and even the customers she served at her workplace. On Friday, May 22nd, Beatriz unexpectedly did not attend a group presentation in class. This was surprising to everyone, as Beatriz was known for her dedication and reliability, and had never missed a class before. What was even more unusual was that she did not contact anyone to explain her absence. The following day, Beatriz's mother, Paula Lebre, received a call from Ruben, a friend of her daughter. he expressed his concern about not being able to contact Beatriz. Immediately after ending the call with Ruben, Paula tried to reach her daughter, but her calls went unanswered. Carlos, Beatriz's father, joined Paula in Lisbon, and together they managed to get the keys to Beatriz's apartment. Beatriz had been sharing the apartment with her cousin. Upon reaching Beatriz's apartment, her parents were pleasantly surprised to find Ruben already there, waiting for them at the entrance. They entered the apartment together and noticed that the main light was on, and there were plates on the dining table, giving the impression that Beatriz would return soon. However, they found her wallet and cell phone on the table, items she would never leave behind unless in a rush. This alarmed them. Paula speculated that Beatriz must have left the apartment in a hurry, leaving behind these essential items. However, the question remained, where could she be? Everything else in the apartment seemed clean and orderly, with no signs of a struggle or foul play. Initially, her parents agreed that she must have left voluntarily and would return soon. Yet, despite the outward appearance, Paula's intuition told her that something was seriously amiss. The residents immediately rushed to the PSP, or Public Security Police of Portugal, and filed a missing person report. As is the case in many countries, individuals are usually required to wait 24 hours before filing such a report, unless there is evidence or a strong suspicion of a crime. However, the apartment showed no signs of forced entry or any signs of a struggle. May 24th, 24 hours have passed without any word or sign of Beatriz. Her anxious parents have barely slept and have grown increasingly worried over time. Throughout this period, they were supported by her friend Ruben. Seeing the parents in such distress, Ruben created a WhatsApp group to initiate the search for Beatriz, inviting everyone he could find who might have known her, including her family, friends, or acquaintances. He organized search parties and shared updates with everyone on a regular basis. As the days passed and there was still no sign of Beatriz, her parents grew increasingly concerned that she might have been lost, kidnapped, or even worse. Paula wondered if a ransom note would eventually arrive. Any information at this point would be a welcome relief. This case started to gain attention in national news, with reporters and journalists discussing Beatriz extensively. Her parents were hopeful that this would raise awareness and that someone would come forward with information about her whereabouts. During this time, the police were conducting their own investigation. They soon announced that they had their prime suspect in custody. What shocked everyone was that the suspect was none other than Beatriz's friend, Ruben. Paula initially thought this was nonsense. The one man who was helping more than any other, rallying people, leading search parties, and updating everyone via WhatsApp, was now being harassed by the police. Paula felt bad for this man. She knew that Beatriz had known Ruben since the beginning of her master's degree, and he seemed more concerned and desperate to find her than anyone else. What could possibly be the misunderstanding that led the police to arrest Ruben? It turns out that as police were investigating Beatriz's disappearance and questioning people who knew her, they learned from her friends that Ruben was very fond of her, almost obsessed with her. He constantly sought her company and wanted her to spend time with him and only him. Additionally, by gaining access to messages on her phone, it appeared that Beatriz and Ruben were more than just friends, and this was enough for them to obtain a search warrant for his apartment. There, they found incriminating evidence to confront him with. Ruben Cowo was a well-liked 24-year-old man, described by many as friendly, intelligent, and at times flirtatious. Similar to Beatriz, he had a strong interest in literature and music and was also studying for his master's degree in social psychology. He wrote fondly about his humanitarian volunteer work in Mozambique and had even published articles in local newspapers. What Paula and Carlos didn't know was that the police had good reason to suspect him. When they brought Ruben to the interrogation room, they questioned him for hours, gradually showing him the evidence they had gathered to gauge his reaction and obtain a confession. They showed him Beatriz's mobile phone, which revealed that they had been in contact for the past few days and that he was the last person to see her alive. They also showed him the blood traces they found in Beatrice's apartment, traces that were invisible to the naked eye, but were visible under ultraviolet light. Beatrice's neighbor had also mentioned seeing blood droplets in the public area of the apartment complex, but at the time, she didn't think much of it and just wiped it off. Ruben denied any involvement, stating that he was merely a friend of Beatrice and was deeply concerned about her. He argued that the investigators were wasting their time when they could be out leading search parties and trying to locate her. When questioned about his whereabouts that night, he acknowledged that he had spent time with Beatrice, but they had parted on good terms. He expressed his current worry for her and emphasized that he had no motive or reason to harm her, as he cared for her greatly. However, when the researchers presented the blood they found in his father's car back at his apartment, and the DNA matched that of Beatrice, a different Ruben emerged. Now faced with irrefutable evidence and surprisingly confronted in a way he couldn't have imagined, he confessed. On May 21, 2020, Ruben picked up Beatrice from her apartment in Lisbon, and they drove to his parents' house about 15 miles away. His parents were away, and they had the house to themselves. They spent the night there, and the next day they returned to Lisbon around 1 p.m. That evening, Beatrice had plans to meet up with some friends who were also her classmates. They had a group project to present the next day, and they wanted to go over the details and have some fun. Beatrice told Ruben that she could not see him that night and that she was going back home to visit her parents and her boyfriend the following day. Ruben was not happy with this. He wanted to spend more time with Beatrice and did not like the idea of her being with other people, especially her boyfriend. He tried to persuade her to change her plans, but she refused. She put her foot down and told him that they were just friends and that he had to accept that. Perhaps this triggered a rejection for another man that he could not accept, because what he did next was repulsive. Ruben felt rejected and angry, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. He picked up an iron Batman figure from home and drove to Beatrice's apartment. He had to pass by a toll bridge where he purposely paid in cash to avoid being traced. He knew that Beatrice was going to be alone because she had told him her cousin was back home. Ruben had also switched his phone to airplane mode as an extra precaution. Upon his arrival, he got out of his vehicle, concealing the baton from sight. He then rang the doorbell, and Beatrice, surprised by his unexpected visit, welcomed him inside. This account aligns with the police report, which noted no evidence of forced entry. The moment the door closed behind them, Ruben launched a violent attack on Beatrice using his baton. He struck her multiple times, and she tried her best to fight back and protect her face and head with her arms, but Ruben overpowered her. He struck her forcefully in the head 5 times, and the violence was so extreme that Beatrice died instantly. Once Ruben calmed down and accepted the reality of what he had just done, he panicked and decided he needed to find a way to conceal this incident and dispose of her body. He spent the next 5 hours in her apartment, carefully cleaning up the blood and any incriminating evidence. He also sent a message from Beatrice's phone to one of her friends, stating that she was too exhausted to meet up with them. He waited until late at night and, under the cover of darkness, carried Beatrice's body on his back, all the way to his car. He drove to the Tajo River, the longest river on the Iberian Peninsula, and dumped her body. He then returned to his house, acting as if nothing had happened. During the interrogation, Ruben began to crack under the pressure and started to sob. He stated that he did not intend to kill her, that he loved her, and that he only wanted to be with her. He explained that he had initially gone to the apartment to talk to her, but she rejected him once again and told him to leave, and that's when he lost control and struck her with the rod in a fit of rage. He admitted that he had panicked and had tried to get rid of the evidence and the body. The police asked him what he had done with the body. and he told them about the exact location in the river where he had wrapped the body in a blanket, tied it with a rope, and watched it sink. He said that he had hoped that the body would never be found and that he could forget what he had done. The police, accompanied by Ruben, launched a thorough search operation along the Tajo River. After days of relentless searching using boats, divers, and drones, they finally discovered Beatrice's body, approximately 1.5 miles downstream from where Ruben had discarded it. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but it was positively identified as Beatrice through her dental records. Forensic evidence confirmed that she had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head, and that she had defense wounds on her hands, indicating that she had fought back. The police charged Ruben with first-degree murder and concealment of a corpse, and took him to the prison where he would await trial. The news of Beatrice's death sent shockwaves through the community, and her friends, classmates, and colleagues were left devastated, unable to comprehend that she had been murdered by someone they all knew and even participated in the search for. A vigil was held in her memory, and social media was flooded with grief and memories of Beatrice. Ruben's betrayal only amplified their grief, and he and his family received damning messages on social media. He was the most hated man in Portugal. Ruben was charged with murder, desecration of a corpse, and simulation of a crime. He was held in preventive detention while awaiting trial. At some point, he was assaulted by another prisoner and had also attempted to end his own life. He was offered psychological counseling, which he refused while awaiting his trial. He was placed under suicide watch, but on Sunday, June 20th, 2020, sometime between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., he died by suicide in his cell using his bed sheet. He left a note behind in which he apologized for his actions and expressed his inability to live with the guilt. Beatrice's mom expressed her condolences to Ruben on social media. She said she had empathy for his family because they too had lost a child. Additionally, she wanted to put an end to the hate that was on social media. There was an overwhelming amount of hate against Ruben and celebration around news of his demise that Paula wanted to counteract with one of peace and love. She wrote, "Ruben is a normal boy, 24 years old, who could well be my son. I must therefore pay my respects to his family." She further said she regretted he took his life because it affected her own closure. "I should have talked to him. It was the least he could have done. I needed answers." The case of Beatrice's murder was officially closed, but the questions lingered. What drove Ruben to commit such a violent act? How was he able to conceal his dark side from everyone who knew him? In the aftermath of Beatrice's death, her family and friends strived to keep her memory alive. They organized concerts and readings in her honor and established a scholarship in her name to support students aspiring to study psychology. They also raised awareness about violence against women and mental health, encouraging people to seek help if they found themselves in a similar situation. The tragic tale of Beatrice teaches us why it's important to control our impulses, learn to respect other decisions even when they go against what we desire, and not be overcome by our dark thoughts and emotions. I leave you with a video of Beatrice, the way she might have wished to be remembered, performing the piano. May she find eternal peace, and may her music continue to resonate forever. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Imagine waiting inside a packed airplane for your 14-hour flight to begin at 1 a.m. The plane is approaching the runway and is about to take off any minute now. Suddenly, you hear an announcement. The plane must return to the airport due to an unforeseen circumstance. You're frustrated and a little worried, but this entire incident was completely unnecessary, caused by the behavior of an unruly passenger sitting in first class on a plane with 250 other people. The tantrum was thrown for the most ridiculous reasons by none other than Heather Cho, the daughter of the CEO of the airline's parent company. She is the vice president of Korean Air, the flag carrier of South Korea. Her behavior wasn't a one-time incident, but just the tip of the iceberg. Heather Cho was notorious for being aggressive and arrogant. This story will reveal how an air rage incident sent Heather Cho to court and eventually to prison. And it wasn't just Heather. Her entire family became notorious across South Korea for their outrageous behaviors. They were caught smuggling luxury products and verbally and physically abusing their employees, contractors, and even police officers. It's surprising how much society tolerates from those with money and power. There are lots of K-drama shows on Netflix based on rich heiresses that are popular nowadays. What I'm about to tell you is a true story of the rich and powerful in Korea, with no romance, only shocking actions and abuse that highlight what these people can get away with in some societies. Let's go back to 1 a.m. on December 5th, 2014. A Korean air flight was about to depart from JFK International Port in New York, heading back to Incheon International Airport in South Korea. On board were two experienced staff members, flight attendant Kim Do-hee and head purser Park Chung-jin, who oversaw the first-class cabin. Heather Cho, once comfortably seated, asked for a glass of water, which Kim provided along with a thoughtful addition, a bag of macadamia nuts. For some reason, this gesture infuriated Heather. Not because she was allergic, she liked nuts, especially macadamia. A normal person would thank the flight attendant for the extra touch, but not Heather. She threw the packet of nuts at Kim and scolded her, questioning how she could make such a rookie mistake by serving nuts in a bag instead of a bowl. This was first class, after all. Kim politely responded, "I just followed the instructions from my training," her voice trembling. She didn't want to be on the bad side of the vice president of the company, who was rumored to be difficult to deal with. But this explanation angered Heather even more. She started screaming at Kim, loud enough that even passengers in the other cabins could hear her. As VP of Korean Air, Heather claimed she knew the guidelines better than anyone. She demanded to speak to the manager in charge. Enter Park Chung-jin, the chief flight attendant who decided to handle the situation personally. He approached Heather with the service manual, but Heather interrupted him, insisting that Kim bring it herself so she could show her the error of her ways. When Kim presented the guide, Heather demanded that Kim specifically identify the part that instructed her to serve the nuts this way. Flustered and embarrassed, Kim frantically flipped through the pages, trying to find the instructions. As if the pressure wasn't enough, Heather started pointing at her and even pushing her shoulder, demanding she hurry up. Another flight attendant rushed in to help and showed the section in the manual that explicitly stated nuts must be served in a closed bag to all passengers. This is to avoid cross-contamination and triggering allergic reactions through contact. But this proof infuriated Heather even more. She started yelling at Park, demanding to know why Park, as the chief flight attendant, didn't explain this clearly in the first place, blaming Park for everything. Heather demanded a sincere apology, asking Park to kneel down in front of her and apologize. She started beating Park with the service document and demanding he get off the plane for mishandling the situation. She insisted he tell the captain to return the plane and remove himself immediately. Park tried his best to calm her down, explaining that the plane was already taxiing to the runway and that, per regulations, everyone needed to remain seated. But Heather didn't care. She was beyond reasoning and screaming louder than ever. She demanded Park inform the pilot to stop the plane immediately and then remove himself from the plane. The pilot, informed of the commotion, made a decision to turn back. He notified air traffic control and announced that the plane was turning back due to an unexpected delay. The plane turned around and Park got off because he, at the time, believed that was the only way to de-escalate the situation. After a 20-minute delay, the flight continued as if nothing had happened. Of course, this behavior is not uncommon for Heather Cho. She is what's known in Korea as a chaebol heiress, the heiress of a large South Korean conglomerate run by a powerful family. Her family owns stakes in several businesses, from airlines to shipping and more. Heather would have gotten away with this incident if it hadn't been leaked to the news media, causing such an uproar in Korean society. But who would dare challenge such a powerful family? The day after the incident, Park, who had removed himself from the plane, took another flight back to South Korea and reported to work soon after. This isn't the end, but the start of a nightmare. Upon his return, he was immediately summoned to a mandatory meeting by the airline's senior management. In the meeting, he was indirectly told that if he wanted to keep his job, he must write a letter of repentance, apologizing to the company and stating that he made a mistake and voluntarily left the plane. Park refused to write this letter, but agreed to keep quiet in return for compensation. Despite this, he was let go because of Heather's version of events, which claimed he did not explain the manual properly to her. However, when Park learned that Heather had started spreading rumors about him being in an inappropriate relationship with flight attendant Kim, he had enough. He wouldn't let these rich, spoiled individuals ruin his life further. He weighed his options. Option 1, wait for the truth to come out through an independent investigation. The incident was under investigation by South Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, but he knew there were people in favor of the Cho family, so he couldn't expect the truth to come out. Option 2, find a job elsewhere. He knew he would have a difficult time finding a job in Korea due to his dismissal and the new allegations of inappropriate relations with a colleague. He realized both options were terrible. There was no choice at all: stay quiet and take the blame, and worse, for someone else's fault, or be proactive and tell the truth. His only hope was to go public with the truth. After contacting the news media, the story spread like wildfire. People had long suspected and experienced this kind of behavior from Korean chaebols, but no one dared to speak up. This was unheard of, but Park had nothing to lose. He had lost his job, his income, and his reputation, and he was angry at being blamed for everything. He wanted justice. There is a Korean term for this type of behavior exhibited by Heather, Gapjil, a term for the arrogant and authoritarian attitudes of people in positions of power over others. Korean society has the longest history of slavery, lasting 1,500 years. Perhaps over generations, this ingrained a hierarchy and entitled mindset in many rich and powerful individuals, and this behavior continues to be tolerated by many in society to this day. The media reported Park's version of events both in South Korea and internationally. Initially, Heather Cho dismissed these reports as slander. However, the media contacted other witnesses on the flight, such as the only other first-class passenger who corroborated Park's account. They described how Cho threw the packet of nuts and verbally and physically attacked the staff. These witnesses also revealed that Korean Airlines had offered them a model airplane and a calendar and told them not to speak to the media if contacted. They found these gifts and the company's efforts to dissuade them from speaking absolutely ridiculous. Korean Air issued an apology to passengers, but attempted to justify Cho's actions by claiming they were part of her duties to inspect in-flight service and airplane safety. Then another incident from 2013 came to light, where Heather attacked a flight attendant for allegedly improperly cooked cup noodles on a flight. These incidents surprised many people, but also confirmed their suspicions, as many had experienced or heard of similar behavior from domineering Korean chaebols. Now, it was all out in the open. When approached by the media, Heather Cho claimed she did not remember the events in question. However, the Korean public were not so easy to forget and demanded the truth. Park, interviewed by the media, said of the incident, "I could feel my dignity as a human being fall apart. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life." The police started investigating the incident and learned that a company executive had ordered employees to delete records of the nut rage incident. On December 9, 2014, Heather Cho's father, Cho Yang-ho, the president of Hanjin Group, publicly apologized and announced that Heather Cho would be removed from all her positions. However, she regained her position as chairperson of Korean Air, president of KAL Hotel Network, and Hanjin Tour on December 31, 2014. The South Korean prosecutor's office arrested Heather Cho for violating aviation safety less than 2 months later, on February 12, 2015. Cho was given a 1-year prison sentence for obstructing aviation safety. The Seoul Western District Court handed the sentence to Cho during a hearing, saying she was guilty of changing the flight plan, an offense that carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. On May 22, 2015, in Seoul High Court, she was found not guilty of changing the aircraft's route. The sentence was reduced to 10 months and suspended for 2 years. Cho was released immediately, having served just 5 months, and it seemed she never had to complete her suspended sentence. To improve her public image, Heather Cho started volunteering at an orphanage. Soon, photos emerged of her reading books to children and patiently helping them. Perhaps she was truly remorseful and turning over a new leaf. However, just 3 years later, in April 2018, her husband released photos and videos of Cho yelling and screaming at him. Her husband, a renowned plastic surgeon, claimed her outbursts and rages were even worse than before. The widespread press coverage of the incident, particularly in South Korea, highlighted the apparent abuse of power by members of South Korea's family businesses. Chaebols, most second or third generation of chaebol in South Korea, think of themselves as members of royal families or in the special aristocratic class, so they think they can do whatever they want, said Yonsei University psychology professor Won-sun Min. But as mentioned earlier, this is just the tip of the iceberg because her family has similar stories of their own. Heather Cho's mother, Lee Myung-hee, also had her share of scandals starting in 2011. Lee verbally and physically attacked renovation workers at her home and group hotel. Video footage showed Lee throwing a large piece of cardboard at construction workers that were remodeling her home in Seoul. In 2013, the workers claimed Lee forced them to kneel, slap their faces, and kick their shins. Police reported a similar incident in 2014, where Lee slapped and yelled at construction workers at a hotel in Incheon and threw construction blueprints on the floor, which could constitute obstruction of business. Lee also treated her drivers and maids poorly. Lee Myung-hee was eventually brought to court by her employees. During the trial, the prosecutor had to read out the indictment detailing Lee's offensive behavior, which was so egregious that the judge asked for it to be projected on a screen. The charges included using profane language, shouting, and physically assaulting employees, including a chauffeur and gardener. The offenses occurred between 2011 and 2018. Lee admitted to her behavior in court, but argued that she was merely strict at work. Later, it was also revealed that she used corporate logistic networks to smuggle luxury goods and illegally hire foreign domestic workers. In 2019, Lee Myung-hee was sentenced to 80 hours of community service and 2 years in jail for 18 counts of abuse against 9 of her employees at a court in Seoul. However, the sentence was suspended for 3 years, meaning that if she did not commit another crime during that time, she would not go to prison. The water rage incident, like mother, like daughter. In March 2018, around the time when Lee Myung-hee's incident came to light and a few years after the nut rage incident, during a meeting with staff from an advertising company, Emily Cho, Heather Cho's younger sister, cursed loudly because she was dissatisfied with the answers given by her staff. She hurled a cup of water at them before driving them out of the meeting. Later, another recording surfaced of her insulting a colleague or subordinate. Emily, who oversaw Korean Air's marketing and commercials, later apologized on Facebook, claiming the outburst was sparked by her passion for commercials. Her reasons were reminiscent of her mother's behavior. Their younger brother, Walter Cho, also had his fair share of scandals, including cursing at Korean Air employees and attacking police officers in 2015. 2018 was not a good year for the Cho family. In 2018, Cho Yang-ho, the Hanjin Group's chairman in Korea, was indicted for several charges such as embezzlement and breach of trust. He had previously been convicted of tax evasion in 2000, along with his father, Cho Chung-hoon, the founder of Hanjin Group, and his brother. The Chos were receiving millions in rebates when purchasing airplanes from Boeing and Airbus, but not paying any taxes on the money. The tax probe came after the then-president criticized Korean Air's poor safety record. His 2018 indictment was for causing losses to the airline by embezzling some 19.6 billion won, approximately US $17.3 million, from the company's trust between 2013 and May 2018 by unfairly awarding business contracts to companies controlled by his family. He also took money from the state health insurance by running a pseudo-pharmacy and was almost charged with evasion of inheritance taxes. But the statute of limitations on that ran out. He passed away in April 2019, 2 weeks after shareholders voted to remove him from the company's board due to various scandals surrounding his family. He was 70 years old. The Cho family continues to wield significant power in South Korea. In addition to stakes in Korean Air, they also own a low-cost budget airline, Jin Air, and have businesses in hotels, tourism, telecommunications, and logistics, with substantial political and business influence. When Cho Young-ho passed away in 2019, Walter Cho took over as chairman of Hanjin Group, according to their father's wishes. However, his sister Heather Cho planned to seize power with their mother siding with Heather. Heather accused her brother of disobeying his late father's will for the family to work together to manage the group. In 2022, a feud over management rights was resolved with the help of LX Group, which acquired a stake in Hanjin KL, the group's holding company, and Walter Cho remained chairman. As for Park, the victim of the nut rage incident, in 2015, he received compensation when the Seoul Western District Court ordered Korean Air to pay him 20 million won, about $18,000, for him to drop his civil case against the airline. He was also entitled to another 30 million won, about $27,000, as compensation for Cho's assaults and insults. He got his job back with Korean Air after 18 months, but had to pass an assessment and take a demoted position as a junior flight attendant. He said his boss would often ask him why he was still working there. He eventually left in 2020 to pursue a new career in politics. Ultimately, these scandals and moral issues involving chaebol children are a reflection of the concentration of Korea's economic power in their hands. They rule over the country's legal system and even its politics.